Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story Ancient Tomb, The War Between Gods and Monsters, the final book in the creepy fantasy series. Fleeing the nightmares of Cold Thistle House, Louisa and her friends have taken up in a posh new London residence. But religious zealots from the Shepherd's army are flocking to the city in droves, and ominous warnings are being left on Louisa's very doorstep. With the evil influence of her father's spirit growing stronger, Louisa knows she'll have to pick a side in the coming war between the old gods, whether shed light or not. Louisa will do whatever it takes to save herself, even if it means returning to Cold Thistle House. And when she strikes another devil's bargain with Mr. Morningside, she's forced to join his supernatural staff on a journey to a gateway between worlds, a place of legend, the Tomb of Ancients. But as always, Louisa knows there's a catch. In this epic finale to Madeleine Roux's gripping House of Furies series, eerie photographs and beautiful illustrations from artist Iris Campiat help bring to life a world where gods and monsters are at war and no one will escape the battle unscathed. Chapter 11. As if stirring from a deep sleep, I distantly felt someone lifting me up. Cold, clean water trickled into my mouth, and I was forced to swallow it. Then came the taste of something bitter, and I went away again, not to the binder's realm but to unbroken and welcome rest. When I woke more fully, it was to the sensation of a cloth pressed to my forehead. Mary was there, staring down at me with wide, worried eyes. "Oh, thank every star in the firmament," she cried. "'Tis awake, everyone, Louisa is awake." My head felt as if it had been stuffed on a pike, my neck stiff and sore. I tried to rouse myself, but weakened, I flopped back down to the pillow. Blinking around, I did not recognize my surroundings, but the light, dusty smell on the air was familiar. They had placed me in a small bedroom, its chintzy, cozy manner reminding me of Giles' home in Derridon. There were overstuffed chairs and fluffy carpets, with a fire in the hearth and two orange cats dozing in front of it. "Where are they?" Mary fussed, standing and trotting to the open door. In answer, raised voices rumbled through the floorboards, then a series of sharp cracks like fevered pounding on a door. I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the dizziness lingering in my head. My right palm hurt as soon as I touched the blankets, and I hissed, pulling it away to find I had not escaped the dark pit unscathed. Scarlet with irritation, black script had been carved into my hand. It was unreadable, a language neither I, nor apparently father, spoke. But I knew, of course, what it must mean. "How did I get this?" I asked as Mary ran back to the bed. "Louisa, I will explain it all to you later. Something is amiss downstairs. Hurry." She was right. There were shouts now and more banging, and I let Mary throw the covers off me and pull me carefully out of the bed. "Wait," I said, teetering. "The diary. Dalton has it," she assured me. "Come on." My body felt as if I had been tumbled down a mountain, but I followed, leaning heavily against her shoulder as we left behind the cats, which appeared unbothered. We emerged onto a walkway above the shop on the 4th floor, with all the many shelves and lanterns spread out below us. From that vantage, I could see Fathom and Kent braced against the front door, their backs pressed to it, their legs straining. Dalton shouted across the floor to Niles, who had managed to find a number of pistols stashed underneath the counter. But as Mary dragged me along toward the stairs, all I could focus on was the woman lying in the middle of the store, curled on her side in a dark feathery dress, unmoving. "Mother!" There was no sign of the witch. "Did it work, or is she?" "Please tell me it worked," I murmured. "We were afraid to move her, Louisa. She hasn't taken a single breath since the ritual. You were moaning and groaning, so we thought it safe to bring you to bed." "Oh, but it's been hours and hours. I was afraid you would never recover." My heart sank. The binder had said the bonds were broken. Why was Mother unmoving? Had the ritual somehow killed her? Had I done something wrong? With each step I felt slightly stronger, and at last I could walk on my own, hurrying across the walkway. We skidded to a stop then, as Fathom shouted something incoherent and the door behind them contorted, sagging inward, then exploded in flames. It was madness to move toward the fire, but our friends were in danger, and I could not just stand there and watch. "Come on, Mary." I tugged at her. "You're still too weak," she insisted. But I was already on the move. "We will find a way to be useful somehow." "Torches," I heard Kent thunder. "There are too many of them, and the moon would not be full again if it were indeed evening." I glanced frantically to Mary as torch-bearing follows of the shepherd streamed into the shop, swinging their lit truncheons in front of them as they went. Kent and Fathom fell back, and Niles and Dalton stood not far from Mother, in front of her on the carpets, taking aim and firing as best they could. "Mary," I cried, "can you not do something?" "I'm weak from the ball, but I will do what I can," she said, pursing her lips tightly and throwing her hands outward. Her shielding powers shimmered out from her chest as usual, though the glimmer seemed somehow dimmed. I dodged around her, taking the steps 2 and then 3 at a time, pelting across the shop floor in time to see the shelves nearest the door catch fire. It was all too soon. The taste of smoke filled my mouth again, and I fought a wave of nausea. This time it was real. This time my friends could be killed if the fire raged out of control. Courage. Mary's shield enveloped us, lessening the sting of the smoke and the heat of the flames, but already the fire was shooting along the walls, the old brittle pages of the books the perfect but heartbreaking kindling. We may as well have been trying to stand against our attackers on a pile of dry twigs. Kent backed into the bubble, accepting a pistol from Niles, but knowing not what to do with it, he simply bludgeoned the nearest person in white, knocking the torch from their hand and stamping it out with his boot. Fathom quickly loaded the pistol she had taken from Niles, and proved an excellent shot, but there were simply too many targets. And worse, more threatening than their swinging clubs, was the fire now creeping across the wood floor toward us. "They must have followed me back from the tavern," Fathom muttered. I could hardly hear her over the melee and the crackle of flames. "I never thought I would say this," Dalton said, firing blindly into the crush of bodies surging against us. "But now would be a good time for your father to come out and play." I went rigid, staring at him, hurt. But he was right. We were being overwhelmed, and I was not at all the marksman we needed. Mary's powers were faltering, the gossamer surface of her bubble fading out, more and more smoke curling in toward us. And the fire, there was no stopping it now. It ate and ate, hungry, gobbling up whole shelves, hemming us in on 3 sides with walls of climbing flames. Mary screamed as a beam not far above us cracked and swung free, then crashed down to the floor, glass cases showering us with shards. Her shield depleted completely, and I heard her footsteps as she abandoned the loft and joined us. Kent took a bad blow to his forearm, stumbling back into me. I caught him by the shoulder and watched the blood seep through his shirt. I closed my eyes, letting the chaos and smoke fill me, letting the blood be all that I saw. First blood. More blood. Father woke almost too eagerly. He had been waiting for this moment. My eyes glazed with red, and I felt the strange and wild stirring of his power as it overtook my own thoughts. I shook, not wanting to lose control, not wanting to unleash him again. There was no telling who would be caught in the ensuing carnage. I could see nothing, but I heard the roar of the fire and the screams of righteous anger from the follows as they beat us back farther into the shop. We were losing ground, and I was out of time. But a light hand fell on my shoulder, soft and consoling, so consoling that I felt Father's influence over me loosen until it fell away completely. I looked up and to the left and found Mother gazing down at me, her mouth half lifted in a forlorn smile. "No," she told me, "you must never let him out." But she silenced me with a shake of her head. All 8 of her delicate purple eyes closed, and the hem of her feathered dress fluttered from the gust of the fire. Pressing on my shoulder, she moved ahead and then seemed to glide across the singed carpets toward the fray. She was defenseless and carried no weapon, and I scrambled after her. I could not let her die at the hands of these people, not after the ordeal I had undergone to save her. She was met with alarmed shouts from Kent, Dalton, and Fathom, who tried to coax her back towards safety, but she would not be deterred. "Peace," I heard her say just above the din. Then louder, "Peace." All at once, as if put under a blanketing spell, the followers lowered their clubs and torches, mouths hanging open a little in wonder. She had captured their whole attention with 2 words spoken as if in friendly conversation. Flinging her arms wide to them, she gazed around, seemingly unconcerned by the smoke or the fire eating its way toward her. "I know your hearts," she said. "I know that when you wake tomorrow, tired and afraid, you will look back on this moment and feel only one thing: regret. Turn away. Turn away from this violence and this hatred. Turn away from this place. Someone awaits you. Will you greet them with relief or with regret?" A hush fell upon us all. The mob shifted, and then I could make out their individual faces. Men and women, old and young, their eyes open wide as if seeing us and one another for the first time. One club fell to the ground, and then another, and I watched a mismatched pair grab hands and turn toward the broken door. They were leaving, retreating. "This is our chance," Dalton said, gesturing for us to follow. "There's a back way out." Quickly. I had hoped to save the books, but we have no choice. I let Mary and Kent go ahead of me, pushing them along, then watched Mother stay there on the burning carpets until the last follower of the shepherd dispersed. Then she turned and drifted along beside me, her hands clasped at her waist, feathery train trailing behind her, dragging through the charred remains of books and shelves. I was astonished, almost at a loss for words. "How did you do that?" She glanced down at me, a dimple running down one cheek. It was only possible because they had no true hate in their hearts for us. I wanted to give them a chance. Peace is always preferable. "Now I know why Father wanted you gone so much," I murmured, following the others behind the sales counter to a back room and then a short door blocked by a bookcase. Niles nudged it aside and opened the door, letting in the blessed, rain-soaked air. "He was not always as he is now," she told me with a mournful sigh. "But he watched too many of us die. When you lose your children, something changes inside you forever." "They were your children, too," I pointed out. "Their loss broke my heart," she said. "It scorched his to ash." Chapter 12. 1248 Constantinople. You do not know where to eat, my friends. You do not know Baki will show you. Baki knows every stall and butcher from Galata to the port. That tea shop by the temple serves piss. What were you thinking, Dark One? My Greek, far better than Henry's, was proving useful when dealing with Baki. I knew him only tangentially through Finch, who spoke highly of the man. Baki took up nearly the entire alley ahead of us, his immense belly popping out from under an embroidered vest and short tunic. His head and shoulders were covered with a fantastically striped shawl, though it did little to hide his horns and pointed ears. "We're not here for the food," I told him with a snort. "But well, be sure to try the oxtail," Henry teased. Baki rumbled with laughter, patting his stomach and turning to give us a wink. His eyes were mismatched, one blue and one a cat-like yellow. "Very good, my friends. I myself do not partake in cow flesh, but Baki will look the other way if you are so inclined. Maybe we can discuss your friend's quest for the writer over honeyed pudding tomorrow. There are rumors of some great battle at the henge, and Baki is always ready to talk of battle. Leave it to Henry to make friends with another upworlder faster than I could." The narrow passage we travelled down was lit only by the lanterns of homes above us. The neighbourhood was one I couldn't name, somewhere to the southwest of the Colosseum and garden-heavy estates of the wealthy. The walls here had once been painted but had been long since neglected. Rat eyes sparkled from every crevice, flies gathered over piles of refuse and rotting bones, their swarms thick enough to choke you. Inside Henry's pack, the little hellhound pup whined. I sympathized. We let Becky go ahead while Ara took up the rear. Her indistinct grumbles joined the dog's whimpers. "I don't like this," I heard her say. It was a phrase she must have uttered 20 times already that day. "You try and stop him," I replied. "You know how he gets once he has a notion." Ara laughed, though her laughter never sounded innocent or merry. "You try. You know he worships you." I rolled my eyes, watching Becky lift a drooping clothes sign out of the way. The darkness here was dense and soupy, the walls pressing in more and more as we followed some path only Becky knew. I told myself we could trust him. Finch was a good judge of character, and Becky was one of ours. Under his shawl, down near his waist, I could see a small tail swishing against the fabric, barely concealed. He was a Riem, strong as a team of oxen, with horns and teeth that could make quick work of flesh. Perhaps only Goliath and Nephilim were stronger, or whatever Ara was, but she was not one of ours. "We are close, my friends." Only whispers now, and only if you must. The silence allowed me to hear the skittering of unseen rat claws and the occasional deep voice muted by plaster and brick. Deeper we went, as if navigating a jungle and not city streets. What I would have given to be back at that mediocre tea shop, sipping herbal brew and complaining about the heat. I had no stomach for these dark adventures, but Henry, whether because of his own dark nature or his curiosity, could not get enough of them. One day I would learn to turn him down. One day. "And you're sure this Faraday chap can help us? I'm spending a lot of coin on you, friend. It had better not be a waste," Henry hissed. "I would take you to him for only the gift of that little doggy," Becky said, his pointed ears perking under his shawl. Under his tunic, his tail swished faster. "Ha! Unlikely. That runt is worth more than any information you or this stranger might have," Henry replied. "And anyway, I've grown attached." Of course. "Now, friends, be silent. We are here." I murmured a prayer of thanks to the shepherd, huddling close to Henry and Becky as the tall and round Riem drew up short to a door hidden by a tattered burlap cover. He pushed the cover aside and knocked in a strange pattern, then waited. Something brushed by my ankle, and I gasped, nearly leaping into Henry's arms with fright. "Steady on," he whispered. "Just a mouse. Mice are not cold and wet." The door swung open, revealing a hovel with a low ceiling. A hunchbacked woman met us there, her hair white, her eyes white, her garb completely black. Nobody would call her appealing to look at, her mouth no more than a short slash above her chin. "Ah, White Keeper, you are looking radiant this evening," Becky cooed. White Keeper. That certainly fit. The rest of it, Henry and I exchanged a glance. She reached a crooked arm out from her black cloak, the wrinkly white skin covered in faded ink markings. Patting Becky's cheek, she puffed out a dry laugh. "What do you need, my boy?" she asked in Greek. "I take it this is not a social call. How disappointing. You never come to see me unless you need something." Becky shrugged and patted his stomach. "You and me, we catch up while these others pay their respects to Faraday. Maybe you still have some supper on the stove." The old woman's eyes narrowed, and she turned a vicious sneer on us. "The master, oh no. Oh no, no, no. You will not be seeing him. Not tonight. He is in a foul mood and is as likely to throw you from the roof as he is to serve you tea. He has not been the same since returning from the salt." "Please, mistress," Henry pleaded, turning on the charm. He leaned languidly against the doorframe, giving her his most boyish grin, flipping the dark hair out of his eyes before lowering his cowl so she could see him completely. "We've travelled such a very long way. It would be a damn shame if it was all for naught." He looked beyond her and into the hovel. The candle she carried illuminated a series of strange markings on the plaster walls. I was not meant to know them, but they turned my stomach to behold. All of them, strange stars and crude characters, were drawn in blood. "I do not fear what lies within," Henry assured her, "and we will not be a bother to your master. We merely wish to ask a few questions." The White Keeper stared at him for a long time, then shifted her gaze to me and finally to Ara, who fidgeted and muttered with boredom while the decision was made. Then the keeper flicked her head once, and Becky held the fabric cover aside while we ducked inside. The hovel smelled overwhelmingly of incense, a wild purple smell that could have only one purpose, concealing the true stench of the place, the reek of old bones and human decay. The blood on the walls was fresh, though dried markings lurked below, the newer signs having been applied recently. They glittered in the candlelight, releasing a wet green smell that tightened the knot in my guts. I confess, I wanted to flee. Henry followed the old woman with a bounce in his step, but I could not match his enthusiasm. Something was very wrong with this place. I felt it deeply, and it was not just my upward aversion to the ways of Henry's people. This was a place of evil. There was almost nothing in the hovel, just a single spit for cooking and a few lumpy cushions. The floor was dusty with sand and dried flecks of blood, and all of us had to duck our heads to avoid the ceiling. The white keeper led us down a passageway at the back of the house, clay stairs built into the ground, perhaps predating this neighborhood or even the city itself. The air ought to have grown colder as we went, but instead I found myself tugging at my cowl, fighting off the feverish heat that became almost intolerable as we descended. "Why is it so bloody hot?" I muttered. It was then that I noticed that Becky had stayed behind. At his height, he might not have even fit in the passage. Yet his absence filled me with unease. He knew these people better than we did. Why had he remained outside? At last the white keeper stopped. The wide arch of a doorway lay ahead, carved into the pale rock below the city, a flimsy curtain swaying back and forth in front of it. The light of 100 or more candles blazed on the other side. Something soft tickled against my toes, falling onto my sandal. I picked it up and turned it in front of the glowing curtain. A feather, long, brown, and sharply pointed. "How peculiar," I whispered. "The master is within," the white keeper rasped at us. "Do not test his patience." Then she was gone, leaving us in the stench and heat of that unholy den. I looked to Henry, but his eyes were wide with childlike pleasure, and he drifted toward the curtain. Had I wanted to, I could not have stopped him from gently pulling the fabric aside. Even Nara seemed fascinated, sidling up next to him, her breath coming short. Inside Henry's pack, the pup gave a low, sad howl. That howl startled the creature. It had made a kind of small citadel for itself, a dark church of candles and straw. The floor was littered with feathers like the one I had found. The creature had great, tawny wings with hooked talons at the points, and it was a man of sorts, narrow of frame and muscular, wearing the torn and blood-stained tunic of a much larger adversary. Thick strands of black beads hung from around his neck, and his skin shone with fissures, haphazard cracks in the flesh, red-gold light blazing from within. It hurt to look at him, and my stomach roared with pain. "Almu-Gul," Henry said, taking a step into the creature's lair and bowing. "Greetings, demon." He sounded positively cheery. "Faraday, I presume, although by the looks of it, that isn't quite right. Is it more likely Farazai, the name lost to time? Or Focula or Focula? Let us settle upon that name. Focula, Great Duke, the Abandoner, leader of the 30 legions, and most importantly dead, last I heard anything of it. How did you come to be here, and what do you know of the books of the binding?" Faraday, or Focula, as Henry had called him, swiveled to face us completely. His face might have been unbelievably handsome were it not for the cracks of light splitting it into strange shapes. He spread his griffon wings wide and held out his hands to us, tears rolling down his cheeks. His right hand was missing 2 fingers, his other had lost the pinky. Focula's voice was like pipe smoke, rich and intoxicating, a young singer's voice, but sad, a voice made only for dirges. "Oh yes, Dark One, I have gone to the White Plains. I have gone to the Solve to meet a binder, and the journey took everything from me. 4 and then 5 days lurched by with no word from the owl wings. There were precious few distractions in the Dipford safe house, and we were left to do nothing but lick our wounds and wait. Niles had decided to join us, seeing as he was without employment now that Cadwallader's had burned down, and we agreed to take him with us to Coldthistle House. From there, he would continue on to Derridon to reunite with his brother. Under ordinary circumstances, a delay of this length would not be troubling, but Dalton had assured us that the owl should have returned with word by now, if indeed there was word to send. Louisa, but something is mightily wrong. Mary and I were allegedly playing whist, but in truth her full attention was in taking the carved wooden fish from Chidioke out of her pocket and fussing with it, thinking I did not know what she was doing underneath the table. The tension inside the cellar was suffocating. Fathom was worried we would be followed and found again, and so we were staying below ground as much as possible. Do you think they could be ignoring us on purpose? I asked Mary. Maybe they're cross with us for leaving. I had won the last trick and it was Mary's turn, but she failed to notice. She shook her head, looking through her cards listlessly. Chidioke wrote me all summer long. I would know if he was angry. What do you think we will find there? I asked. I had told her little of Dalton's diary. What I had read so far seemed somewhat promising. Maybe Mr. Morningside had found his own way of summoning binders, working from Foker's experiences. They had been following Mr. Morningside's fancy and chasing down the origin of the strange books, and now that I had met a binder, I knew well they had great power enough even to remove father from my spirit without killing me. It pains me to speculate, she murmured. My heart aches whenever I allow myself to imagine. I watched her match a suit, and then I reached for a card on the stockpile, inhaling through my teeth when the edge of the card scraped the raw marking on my palm. Mary had taken me through exactly what had happened from her perspective during the ritual. In her eyes, I had gone nowhere, simply kneeling on the carpets with the stranger. Then, abruptly, I had started screaming, throwing myself on the ground and rolling, thrashing my arms. She hadn't understood why I had such a bizarre reaction to a bit of sage being burned. And I was speaking a horrid language, she said, hardly even sounding like myself, screaming things that made no sense to her or anyone in the room. They were black, evil words. She told me there was no mistaking that. It had grown worse when the stranger took my palm and began tapping ink into it with the bone needle. The stranger had spoken the same frightening tongue, and her eyes had rolled back in her head, the white flickering as she blindly scored the ink into my skin. I flipped over my hand and regarded the inky lettering that remained there. It seemed to change each time I beheld it. A black and evil language. Even though I knew from the binder that the marking meant willing, it looked awfully sinister. Does it still pain you? Mary asked gently. I can fetch more balm. The ache is fading, I said. Now if only the mark would fade, too. At least it worked. Though I have no idea what to think of Mother. I shared her bafflement. Fathom and Dalton had scrounged up more mundane clothing for her as a disguise, and they'd given her a widow's black veil to hide her unusual hair, skin, and eyes when we were not concealed in the safe house. She kept largely to herself, reading voraciously, studying all the trinkets she could find here and spending long hours regarding us, as if trying to memorize our every gesture. All the stray insects that infiltrated the cellar flocked to her, buzzing at her feet like ready little servants. Louisa. Mary was watching me with her lip pulled between her teeth, her cheeks dyed dark pink. Yes. Louisa, I think we should go to Cold Thistle House as quickly as possible. I know the attack on Cadwallader shook you, and I know you fear a trap, but I don't think we should wait any longer. This waiting is driving me mad, she said, scattering her cards to the table. I agree, I replied, to her surprise. And frustration. Really then, why tarry? We should find a proper carriage straight away. We haven't gone because I'm afraid, I told her, interrupting her excited planning. I know what it's like to meet a binder now, and I'm not sure I can survive it again. It was awful enough lifting a curse from someone else. I can only imagine it will be much harder to undo magic done to me. I'm afraid of what it will cost. I'm afraid I won't be strong enough to endure it next time. She frowned and nodded, then put her hand over mine, the uninjured one, and gave it a gentle pat. I have seen you accomplish remarkable things, Louisa, and you are not alone. There's a reason I stayed with you instead of going back to Yorkshire already. You need my help, and Kent's too. We are all so much stronger together, looser and weakened when alone. I tried to smile, but my doubts lingered. She didn't know what it was like to live this way. She didn't know how it was to be afraid of your own mind. Mary might have witnessed the ritual from afar, but she hadn't seen the binder face to face and withstood its test. We will find a way to fix this, I promise you that, and our chances will only get better if we have Chijioke on our side too. And Poppy, she gave a short laugh. And though you do not trust them, I believe in my heart, Mr. Morningside and Mrs. Hallam will help you if they can. Maybe with their help it will not be so bad this time. I sighed, putting down my cards. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps the not knowing is a prison rather than a shield. It was decided. I only needed to convince Dalton, though that proved harder than I expected. He was reluctant to go without knowing the state of things at Cold Thistle House, but we had waited long enough, and I appealed to his tenderness for Henry, which was deeper than I had assumed. In this regard, the diary proved a cunning tool. Why did you give me this? I asked him as he took tea that same afternoon alone. Holding up the diary, I perhaps childishly waved it in his face. What is the point of it all if you do not let Mr. Morningside help me? If Mother had done nothing, I might have torn those people in the shop limb from limb. The time for waiting is over. He regarded me over the rim of his teacup for a long spell, then he glanced at my healing hand and closed his eyes, pursing his lips. I know, he said. Only I'm afraid. I'm afraid, too, I confessed. But that's not enough anymore. Fathom took charge of organizing our escape from London, though she was wary of leaving the safe house even to arrange the carriages. We decided to leave that evening, using the cover of dark to ride to St. Albans and then exchange carriages, riding northeast toward Malton. Dalton assured us he could acquire faster transport in St. Albans, shortening the normally lengthy trip to North Yorkshire with a bit of help from a holy man and his even holier stock of horses. This was all explained to Mother, who absorbed the information silently, nodding, that permanent beatific smile growing a little upon realizing we were indeed going to Cold Thistle House. Good, she replied. I should like to see where Father was defeated. I said nothing but turned away to hide my frustrations. He certainly did not feel defeated. Chapter 13. I dreamt of a black and silver hall, a corridor of stars that went on into eternity. A ram the size of a mountain reared onto its hind legs, towering above me and made of dazzling white globes in little clusters, while a serpent as long as the Thames uncoiled and showed its star-bright fangs in warning. It happened slowly, the clash of these two impossible animals unfolding over hours, and I had almost enough time to count the stars that made up their forms. When fang touched muzzle, the star creatures came crashing down, falling at my feet and topping me to the glassy ground. The ram and serpent shattered, broken apart, their radiance scattering around me like a spilling of jewels or a fallen chandelier, crystals sharp and spinning. I lifted my arms, and they were stars, too, and soon I was floating, lifted, hovering high above it all, something beautifully remade, something new. How can you sleep so much, those horses and the rocking, so much commotion and hue? Yawning awake, I found myself staring at a cross seatmate. As planned, we had changed horses at St. Albans, a kindly man of middle age lending us two teams of sleek mares, their coats and tails yellow as buttercups. They pulled us across England at alarming speed, and Kent was not wrong about the considerable clatter and crash of their hooves as they churned the roads beneath us. Even the mud seemed not to bother them, and the bad storms had driven most travellers off the paths, allowing us to make each stop well ahead of schedule. Kent was bundled under a thick plaid blanket, never one for the damp and cold. I'm simply exhausted, I told him. Mary shared that feeling, apparently dozing next to me, curled up on her side. Mother might have been asleep behind her dark veil, but it was difficult to say. Fathom drove our team of horses, while Dalton and Niles took turns driving a smaller, lighter carriage that we struggled to keep pace with. How is your hand? He asked. Do you need more of the draught? I showed him my palm, now almost completely healed, a few curls of dry black skin flaking off and falling to the floor. At the safe house, he had mixed me a concoction I had sampled before when Giles and Mary had tried to calm me after I'd been attacked on the road to Derridon. It was a magical tea, deliciously sweet, and it soothed the mind and encouraged healing. It only itches now, I told him. As it had before, the illegible markings on my hand seemed to shift. What does it look like to you? The more he practiced his English, the more he used it with me, though frequently he slipped in and out of languages, often reverting to his native tongue when he was at a loss for the word in English. Ira, the language of hounds. But I know that is not possible, Kent added with a twist of a smirk. There is no written way to communicate such things. So, like a howl, it looks like a howl to you? I asked, matching his smile. His lavender eyes, however, lost a bit of their sparkle. No, it looks like the sound of a wounded animal. Fitting, I muttered. It looks like gibberish to me. You will forgive me for saying so, I ticked, but it unnerves me to see it. I wish I could forget the words you screamed that day, and the helplessness I felt while that woman poked and prodded you. Well, I know that sting, but I asked for it, you did not. Then he gasped and covered his mouth with both hands, snorting. Oh, but that pet name is irksome. I'll do better. Sleepy, I leaned my head against my arm and the window, watching the rain-soaked countryside fly by. Maybe it's growing on me. His thick brows lifted at that, his head tilting in an indelibly hound-like manner. It was a question and a look of interest in one. When this is all over, I will take you to a party. A real party. With scorpions and music that does not put you to sleep. Just the two of us, No, Kent. My heart is as fractured as my mind. Who would want that? I sighed. He shrugged, apparently unoffended, snuggling down into his plaid woolens. Someone who sees that even scars can be beautiful. Aren't we just maudlin? I teased, bracing as the carriage rocked sharply, something going hard under the wheel. No, not something on the road itself. It was shaking. What on earth? We had escaped London by night unseen, and we had made 4 stops on the journey without event. But the thunder shaking the ground was nothing natural. It had the rhythmic, 4-part cadence of a beast running at a gallop. The carriage jerked hard to the left, waking Mary, who tumbled against me with a shriek. What the hell is that? I heard Fathom scream through the window. Kent reacted the quickest, shooting out of his seat and slamming down the window. Sticking his head outside, he twisted, then pulled himself back inside. Mother lifted her veil, her 8 eyes blinking rapidly with sleep before she peered outside, mildly, as if this were no surprise at all. Her lips tightened with disdain, the first time I had seen her look anything but contented. The shepherd does not want us to reach him, Mother observed through clenched teeth. And he has sent a terror to do his work. The other carriage dropped back alongside us, and a rock hit the window next to Mother. Mary quickly lowered the window just enough to hear Dalton as he shouted across at us, his hair wet with rain as we sped down the road. The carriage is shaking and jumping. It's a Tarrasque, he cried. We might outrun it. Coal Thistle is but 6 miles down the lane. And then what? Mary wailed, stricken. We're leading that thing to our friends. Mother, can you not do something? Appeal to it. It's coming closer. Kent kicked open the carriage door. The horses up front whickered and bucked, gravel and rain spraying our feet. I want to get a better look. And with that he climbed out and onto the roof, the heavy tread of his boots thumping above our heads an instant later. Mother shook her head, opening her hands to me with a soft sound of regret. I cannot harm this creature, child. It cannot hear reason as a human might, and bloodshed is not my way, she said. I can try to lead it away, Dalton screamed from the other carriage, banging on the door to get Nihilus' attention up front. We're lighter and faster, perhaps we can be a distraction. And then what? I heard Fathom shoot back from the driver's box. She was right. Simply outrunning it was not enough. Eventually soon, in fact, we would reach Coldthistle House, and with no word from Wings, we had no guarantee that its inhabitants were in a state to be of any use. My heart raced. I hadn't yet even seen the thing, but I could hear it shaking the ground as if a herd of giants pursued us across the moors. "Mary," I said hurriedly, rummaging in the only bag I had taken into the carriage. "Can you shield us?" "I'm still weakened, I fear," she replied with a whimper. "And I doubt I can stop something that bloody big." The creature chasing us let loose a high-pitched shriek, an unholy clamor that sounded as if the sky itself had been torn in two. The breath of it rattled the carriages, buffeting us forward a few meters. The carpet bag nearly leapt out of my hands from the constant and violent shaking. There was so little inside. Some bandages for my hand, a tawdry novel, Dalton's diary, and the dull supper knife I had taken from Lady Thrampton's ball. I picked up the knife and twisted it in my hand, an idea slowly but steadily forming. I fumbled toward the window, sticking my head partly out and looking up, finding one of Kent's hands gripping the wood and canvas edge of the roof. "Yehu, how is your arm?" "Mended, silly one." You know that his face appeared suddenly, bouncing back and forth as he struggled to stay flattened to the roof. "No, I mean, can you aim, can you throw?" I called. His eyes lit up, his mouth falling open with eagerness. Perhaps it was unkind, but I could imagine a dog excited over a bone making just such an expression. I once raced chariots with the God King himself. I let him win, though he was lousy with a lance. "Perfect," I cried back, then softer to myself. "I think. Louisa, don't be ridiculous, you can't go out there." Mary scuttled across the bench to me, trying to grab my ankle, but the carriage shot forward again, and I dodged out of her grasp. "Do you have a better idea?" "Trust me." I ignored the flash of pain in my hand as I pushed open the carriage door and the wind whipped against me. The rain lashed harder than I expected, and I said a silent prayer that this would work and that I would accomplish it without losing my legs under the wheels. "Pull me up." I put the knife between my teeth and grabbed the roof's edge with both hands, trying to steady myself as the breathlessly fast pace and jumping wheels nearly rattled my bones free of my body. Kent swore, his strong hands closing over my wrists and yanking hard, my feet kicking free. For a single, terrible, exhilarating, wonderful moment I was hanging there in the air, as weightless as a bird. I heard myself squeak with crazed relief as he hauled me up and onto the roof. But it was harder to find purchase than I expected, and I was forced to lie completely flat, creating as little a target for the wind as I could. "What are you doing?" He was furious, his face a finger's breadth from mine as he dropped down next to me. "Good God, it's massive." I ignored him, transfixed by the hulking beast galloping after us. It had the bulk of a dragon from legends, though its head was that of a mangy lion, its legs thick and stumpy as a bear's, scales covering it from neck to whipping, barbed tail. "Dalton said it's a Tarrasque," I shouted over the wind. "Whatever the hell that means." "Fascinating. How do we stop it?" "With this," I said, reciting another prayer in my mind. "It certainly couldn't hurt. We would need more than skill and luck to keep that mountain-sized lion from gobbling us up. The welts in the muddy earth it left in its wake would soon be ponds." I glanced ahead, wind stinging my eyes, the stretch of road becoming familiar as we neared Coldthistle. Dalton had raced off the road and onto the flat country land to the side, trying to divert the beast's attention, but the Tarrasque remained dogged in its pursuit of our carriage. It had no interest in the fast little feet and gliding away. The Tarrasque gave another shuddering, trilling roar, and its foul breath was close enough to ruffle our hair. There was no more time. "With this," I repeated. "And your arm." Closing my eyes, I clutched the supper knife in my fist. I poured all of my concentration into it, focusing so hard on its transformation that I could hear the blood singing in my ears. My breathing raced out of control, but that only helped, the chaos and fear accelerating the dark magics of my blood until the knife in my hand grew and grew, becoming heavier and longer until I could no longer hold it. Kent caught the idea quickly, ripping the spear out of my hand and crawling to his knees. I craned my neck to watch him, squinting against the hard beating rain. He lifted the spear to his shoulder and gave an experimental poke toward the Tarrasque, but then he sighed and shook his head. "Grab my feet, Louisa, and don't let go." Gods, but this is the stupidest thing I've ever done. I did as he asked, reaching out for his boots, clamping my hands down over them and throwing myself forward to pin them better with my weight. Kent climbed shakily to his feet, balancing with the tip of the spear on the roof. Inside the carriage, I heard Mary screaming with alarm. I felt it too. The Tarrasque was gaining, tireless, perhaps spurred by seeing a living target appear so clearly. Its breath jerked the carriage forward and back, the rear wheels lifting off the ground for an instant, and its loose and flapping jowls threw spit in every direction. Some of it landed on the carriage roof by my foot, and I watched it sizzle and eat away at the canvas and then the wood, burning clear through. "Mind your head, the drool is like acid," I shouted. The hole drilled through and through, then hissed as it hit the cushion just beside Mary. She blinked at me through the opening, covering her mouth with both hands. "You've got an audience, Kent, and one chance at this." He thrust the spear over his right shoulder a few times, preparing, the loose edges of his coat flapping behind him like a cloak. His legs were shaking from the force of staying upright, and I pressed down harder, leaning into him, my last breath catching in my throat as he gave a huge grunt of effort and used our one chance, letting the javelin fly. Chapter 14. I heard the spear strike its mark before I saw it. The beast's deafening howl might be heard all the way back to London. That more than the way it floundered, its shaggy brown head tossing, its short, thick legs caving in, pierced me to my core. The Tarrasque gave two last faltering leaps, fur and scales slick with mud, before it dove forward, jowls shoveling stone and muck, carving a ditch into the road. Kent had struck it in the left eye, but the javelin had travelled deep, only a stub of an end protruding from the bloody ruin of its socket. Fathom slowed the horses with a cheer, and I lifted my head enough to see Niles and Dalton circle back, bringing their carriage up next to ours from the opposite direction. I pressed one hand to my heart, checking to see if indeed I still breathed. It felt as if pure lightning skittered across my skin. Then I was airborne, lifted clean off the roof and spun, Kent dancing me up and down before he threw his head back and gave his own howl of relief. "Aha, you see that I could have beaten the God King any day I pleased, any day. I hope he is watching from the land of two fields." It was a very fine toss, I admitted wryly, loath to puff him up any further, laughing at his chest-bounding display. He quickly sat down, all but collapsing, resting his forehead on his knees as he drew in deep, noisy breaths. "We made it," I murmured. The rain had matted my hair to my face, and I pushed at it uselessly. "That was very lucky." And that he whipped his head up, purple eyes dancing, two of his fingers mimicking legs climbing a wall, was courageous. Or foolhardy, I chuckled. Though I suppose one can rarely tell the difference. The door below us cracked open, and Mary leaned out, trying to find our faces. "How extraordinary did you see, Louisa?" The spittle went all the way through down to the ground. Dalton jumped from his carriage and leaned back against it, running both hands through his gingery hair. "God, but we're fortunate to be alive. This isn't a good sign, Louisa. If the shepherd is desperate enough to pull the Tarrasque from Nerluck, then I fear he is capable of anything. More retaliation for Sparrow, I suppose." Kent leaned over the edge of the carriage and spat. "Ha! Roe will just have to try harder. We are proving difficult to kill." "I wouldn't encourage him," Dalton shot back with a grimace. "Because try harder he will." He glanced toward the Tarrasque and shuddered. The thing was breathing its last, groaning as it flattened against the earth and heaved, rolling, slain, onto its scaly side. "We should press on. I don't relish the thought of being on the roads at nightfall, and what the devil." Mother had, without our noticing, emerged silently from the carriage and begun marching toward the Tarrasque. She pulled the black veil over her eyes, taking slow, sombre steps until she had climbed the mound of stone and mud heaped against the creature's face. I heard her humming something quiet and baleful, a song of mourning. Kneeling, she placed both dark purple hands on the furred snout. "Louisa, we really should." "SHHH." I cut Dalton off, raising my hand, watching as the immense creature, matted and blooded and still, gradually began to break apart, shimmering into thousands of rose-colored butterflies. I thought I heard the Tarrasque give a rumbling groan as it disappeared, as if it merely dozed and had turned over in its peaceful rest. The butterflies scattered upward, blending almost perfectly into the hints of pink at the edges of the horizon. The rain began to abate, leaving behind the fresh wetness of the long grasses and shrubs, wild flowers bobbing their rain-laden heads along the hedge. Mother returned to us with her chin held high. "Every creature deserves mercy," she murmured, passing between us. Before stepping into the carriage, she handed me something. A blunt, blooded supper knife. Then she took her seat, rigid, as regal as a queen. Her eyes found mine, and hers were glistening with unspent tears. Every creature, even those that would hunt us. My heart grew weighty with dread as we crested the last hill before Cold Thistle House. I remembered my first visit to the place so sharply I could almost smell the bird droppings and the cook fire soot still clinging to Mrs. Haylam's clothes. And Lee. Lee had been there. I had thought of him frequently when summer began and I was new to London, but then city life consumed me. The months disappeared while preparing the house, and before I could even appreciate the warmer months, autumn arrived. The dizzying chaos of the past fortnight had driven him from my thoughts altogether. I wondered how I would find him, and if he would greet me warmly or as a forgotten friend. There would be no urge to blame him. I should have written. I should have kept him fondly in my thoughts more. I should have done a lot of things better. Spoon had become knife. I tumbled that around in my head, uncomfortable with the symbolism, uneasy with the knowledge that the monster in my spirit could rage out of control at any moment and make me its unwilling tool of destruction. I had expected to feel more conflicted about our return, but now wet, tired, and troubled, I was eager for a hot meal and a roof over my head. What hospitality awaited us, however, remained a mystery. Chapter 15. 1248 Constantinople. I had never thought to pity a demon, particularly not one as ancient and powerful as Focala, yet the creature all but demanded my sympathy. He cowered against his cathedral of candles, brown wings half wrapped around his body as he held his wounded hands close to his middle. "You can understand my impatience," Henry told him a bit harshly, I thought. "We have come a very long way, and you are not being altogether cooperative." The demon crouched, staring up at Henry and showing his teeth. "Look at me, Dark One. Look at what happened to me in the salt." The salt. Henry rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. "What is he talking about?" "Be kind, Henry. He's half mad," I said. "No," Aura said. "The salt. There's a lake of salt, massive, to the east. Tuzgl." The demon hissed at that. "Go not near the salt. You will return not at all or in pieces." Henry loosened the pack on his back and pulled out the chestnut-colored pup inside, holding it out toward Focala, who regarded it with shifting, narrowed eyes. "Is she right? Did you learn more of the books at Tuzgl?" Shrinking, the demon wrapped its wings completely around itself, hiding. "No. No, there is nothing there but desolation. Desolation and pain. There are no answers. There is nothing. It is all nothing. All meaningless." His voice was muffled but easy enough to hear. Henry put his mouth close to the puppy's ear, murmuring, "Is he lying? Is there deceit in his heart?" The dog, small as it was, gave a low growl and then snapped. Henry patted it on the head fondly and then tucked it under his arm, sighing. "I know you do not want to serve me or anyone, Focala, but make this easy on yourself. Tell us the whole truth. Tell me what you found at Tuzgl. Tell me." His patience was running thin. It was rare for his temper to emerge, as most things in life, even its tribulations, were a lark to him. I had seen him laugh off the deepest insults, the most cutting criticisms, failures, mistakes, and on, but a red flush crept across his cheeks now, pinpricks of silver standing out in his eyes, his anger such that the charm he used to conceal his true nature wavered, his feet contorted and backward facing. I reached for the pup, taking it from him, afraid that he would squeeze the poor thing to death in his rage. "You wouldn't want to make me beg," Henry added in a soft, almost sad whisper. "I know you wouldn't want that." He gestured to Ara, who turned and presented her heavy embroidered bag to him, the one containing the black Albion. The demon's wings began to tremble, but it otherwise managed nothing coherent, muttering over and over again about the dangers of the salt. "White sands in my wounds, white sands in my wounds, white sands." "Perhaps if we gave him more time," I suggested, watching Henry remove the black book and run a tender hand over the symbol on the cover. "Or perhaps we should heed his warning. I like my fingers quite where they are." "I hate to agree with the upwilder," Ara whispered, "but here we are. I told you not to go poking around the books. Look what it did to this pitiful wretch." "Your opinions are noted and discarded," Henry replied, brow furrowed. He cradled the book in one arm and opened it. To me, it appeared as if the choice of page was random, but I knew him better than that. His fingers drifted over rows of text, words that I could not and could never decipher. It was not a language meant for me. I held the dog close to my chest, trying to soothe its fussing and whimpering. "I compel you," Henry stated, holding out his other hand to the demon. His fingers were steady, his arm locked, his eyes suddenly completely black. "Wayward one, reluctant servant, I compel you now. You will give me your truth, and you will serve as my guide." The tawny wings enfolding the demon shook and shook, his babbling breaking off as Henry's voice boomed through the hollow cave. The flames of the candles danced on their wicks, threatening to extinguish. Ara closed her eyes and pressed her thin lips together hard. A faint whisper began from the demon, but Henry ignored it, repeating his demands, each repetition growing louder and more furious. Then, as quickly as a rope snapping under tension, the wings flew wide and the demon emerged, only he changed rapidly in front of our eyes. The cracks in his skin widened, no longer glowing gold but billowing black smoke. He became a thing of shadows and red eyes, still winged but expanding until his newly horned head brushed the ceiling. The puppy shivered and shrieked, flailing until I shielded it. Henry did not waver, but the demon of smoke and eyes rolled toward us, the smell of brimstone unmistakable. "You will give me your truth, and you will serve as my guide," Henry thundered. But the demon had broken, it had become pure defiance. "Ai Akani, Ok. Napuaka. Henry. Muskim Zal." I had never heard Ralu Elusha afraid before, but the tremor in her voice was clear as she warned Henry, and I slowly backed away. The creature could not be less interested in me. It had eyes only for Henry. "You will serve as my guide," Henry shouted again, ignoring us. His outstretched hand was just about to touch the smoke, and I held on to a single breath, watching as the soot-black cloud neared. "Aratuaka MZU. It was a voice straight from hell, as fell and dark as the creature itself. I felt as if I were going to vomit and dropped to my knees, closing my eyes and lapsing into prayer. I rocked back and forth with the dog in my arms, hot tears dripping down my cheeks and into his fur. He curled into me, the only small spot of comfort, as the nightmare voice bled into my lungs like poisoned air thick with ash. The whole of the cave and the hovel above quaked, and I braced for the collapse. "Fall then, demon. I name you all that is low, all that is man." A cold whisper chased through the room, and I opened my eyes, watching as the hand touching the black Albion began to resonate with glowing grid power. The power surged through Henry's arm just as his fingers disappeared into the smoke of the demon's body. Focala's cry of anguish died, swallowed as he diminished like steam that had burst from a cauldron being sucked instantly back inside. When the haze cleared and the echo of their dark speech had faded, all that remained was a pale and tremulous man curled onto his side like a newborn, an oversized loincloth draped over his waist. He shook with tears, and at once I turned away. I was suffocating. I thought neither Ara nor Henry had noticed me shuffling away toward the stairs, but a moment later I heard Henry snap the book shut, and then he was at my side. That was cruel, I whispered, realizing my tears hadn't slowed. You went too far. Henry shrugged, unmoved. He's a demon spicer. It's none of your affair. He will do as I ask. When I looked at him again, something was different. He was his same handsome self, carefree and smirking, cocky in his apparent victory, but a dark glimmer in his eye disturbed me deeply. There was an absence of light and pity there, just empty blackness. That isn't the point at all, Henry. How could that ever be the point? There would be no afternoon tea or refreshing cucumber sandwiches at Cold Thistle House. My old place of employment, the house I had known as the Devil's and then briefly as my own, was smoking, in chaos, and under siege. We stopped the carriages not far from the short drive that led up to the mansion itself. We got out and stood along the edge of the grass, which even after so much rain curled inward, yellowish and dead at the ends. The shrubberies lining the path had not been pruned in weeks. One of the pointed towers on the west side of the house had recently been on fire. The burnt wood still smouldered. Take Niles to Derridon, Dalton said after a stretched spell of silence. This is no place for humans just now. But, please fathom. I could hear the exhaustion in Dalton's voice as he turned to her. His clothes were still damp from the rain, and her coat and hat were sodden, mud darkening her boots to the knees. She didn't budge, hands balled into fists at her side. At last she relented, and nudged the owlish little Niles toward the faster, light carriage. Fine, she muttered as she went. But I'll return as soon as I can. Take your time, Dalton called after her. And for pity's sake, be safe. I watched her climb back into the driver's box, wondering if that would be the last I saw of her. The wave I gave her was small, unsteady, for I was loath to part with such a stalwart companion. She smirked and tipped her tricorn hat in return, and then she was snapping the whip, calling up the horses, and manoeuvring back out into the road. I wish I didn't have to send her away. Dalton sounded winded, as if he had run the whole way from London to Cold Thistle. But God only knows what we're walking into. Now we know why Wings never returned, I replied, surveying the battered house and the unkempt lawn. Something lean and golden swooped toward the stables, wings flashing in the fading dusk light. One of yours, I asked, following Dalton as he crept onto the grounds, circling away from the eastern half of the property and keeping to the shadows of the tall, forgotten shrubberies and gargoyle statues. Kent and Mary joined us, and Mother glided along behind them. He's called back all of his command, Dalton whispered, crouching behind a statuary. We mimicked him except Mother, who seemed simply to melt into the greenery, innately part of it. We must see if the others are well, Mary insisted, her big green eyes darting toward the front doors. Wait. We must wait and be patient. Right now we have the advantage. They have no idea we made it this far and survived the Tarrasque. We mustn't spoil this chance. Dalton peered around the bush, squinting into the coming darkness. That was an adjudicator, but impossible to say who from here. Finch it seemed the likeliest option, given the last I had seen of him was at the house. Hiding is for cowards. If we have the advantage, we should use it. Kent sniffed and then prodded me in the ribs. Make another javelin for me with that knife of yours. I'll knock that stupid bird out of the sky. SHHH. Mary slapped at his hands. Look. The adjudicator had ended its graceful ascent on the top of the eastern attic. It stood very still for a moment, blazing with liquid golden light, its features blending into that ever-moving surface, its spear leaning against one shoulder. Then its massive wings stretched open, and it dove toward the lawn. All of us followed it with our eyes, and as it neared the ground, a blur of brown and orange intercepted, leaping from out of nowhere, from a hole in the lawn. The adjudicator gave a strangled cry and then wrestled free, frantic, taking flight again, but this time soaring away from the grounds, disappearing somewhere over the eastern fields. Bartholomew, Mary squealed, covering her mouth. No sooner had she spoken the dog's name than it came pelting toward us, muzzle split in what looked like not just panting, but a smile. He found us easily behind the bushes and tackled Mary to the ground, plate-sized paws on her shoulders as he licked her face from neck to brow. All right, yes, I missed you too, she laughed and pushed at him. The dog had gotten even bigger since I left, nearly the height and strength of a lion. Goodness gracious, Dalton breathed with bugged eyes. He's huge. Rather changed from the last time you saw him, I chuckled and reached for the dog, scratching him behind the ears. Bartholomew rewarded me with a nudge of his giant head. He was just a pup last we met, Dalton agreed, marveling at the creature. Could fit in 2 of your hands, neat as you please. From around the yard near the stables came a soft cry, then another. It was a searching sound, sing-song. Puppy. Doggy, you come back here this instant. Oh, I hope that horrid meanie didn't carry him off. Her fears were swiftly abated as Bartholomew poked his shaggy head out from around a shrub to the delighted shrieks of Poppy, his steadfast co-conspirator. I heard her little footsteps on the gravel before I saw her, and then she appeared from behind a gargoyle, braided tail swinging. Dressed in a stained white frock, she seemed thinner than I remembered, though still with large, doll-like eyes and a permanent reddish-brown stain covering a large part of her face. She stopped short, understandably, finding not only her faithful hound but 3 familiar faces and 2 strangers hiding among the verge. I know you, she exclaimed, pointing. And you also, have you come to drive off the shepherd man? Poppy Mary pushed herself up from the ground and threw her arms around the little girl, who, if pressed, could scream loud enough to pop each of our heads like an overripe melon. It is ever so nice to see you again, Mary, the girl said, squeezing her fast and then stepping away. It is really you, Mary. It's me, she replied. I promise. And this is Dalton Spicer, an old friend of Mr. Morningside's, I explained, making hasty introductions. This is Mother. Whose mother? Poppy asked, scrunching up her nose. I'll explain more later, yes, but can you tell us, is it safe to go in the house? Are there more of those adjudicators about? I asked. Poppy swung around and nodded toward the front doors, taking Mary's hand and holding it tight. Chijioke has the doors barred, but I know the special knock. It's quite safe inside. The shepherd's people come and go, but Mrs. Hallam says it won't be long before there are a lot, and we are really and truly something that starts with an F but that I'm not allowed to say. Then we should go in quickly, Dalton said, glancing nervously toward the front entrance. All of you go ahead, I'll be along shortly. Any adjudicators will think twice before attacking me on sight. Kent snorted. Is that impending betrayal I smell? You have nothing to fear from me, sir, not if the shepherd is ready to send the full might of his host against Henry. Go now, and keep your heads down. I took Kent and Mary by the forearms and tugged them along. Mother came with us, though she looked quizzically at Poppy and then Bartholomew, as if placing them in some kind of invisible order she had sorted out. She moved with speed when she wanted to, and she matched our strides as we shouldered up to the front doors where Poppy gave the special knock. The Dipford safe house and its passphrase felt hundreds of years ago. I was so bloody tired, my body aching, my hands still in dull pain, my mind eager for unbroken rest. Father's voice disturbed me less with Mother so near, and it gave me hope that she could be a soothing presence until he was removed completely. Perhaps I might never need to hear him again. Poppy, is that you? I saw Mary practically wilt at the sound of his voice rumbling through the door. It's me plus a bit more, but they are all nice. I think. What? It's us, Mary cried, laughing with relief. We sent word but came when you never wrote back. There was a soft, sworn word and then the sound of boards grinding against boards. At least 6 different paddocks were undone, and then, with a shuddering groan, the tall, broad doors of Cold Thistle House opened to me once more. It was dark inside and musty with old air, but the sight of Chijioke there with a hopeful smile was all the welcome we needed. Mary flung herself into his arms, and we filed in behind to fill the foyer. Chidioke had just set her down lightly on her feet when someone cleared their throat from the open staircase. I knew, of course, who it would be, but my blood still ran cold at the sound of his dark, twisting voice. Well, it appears I was right. Fate has brought you back to Cold Thistle House, Louisa, and I see you did not come alone. Chapter 16. Henry Morningside, the devil himself, did not look well. His hair was neatly coiffed, naturally, but his dove-grey suit hung rumpled and loose on his frame. Vivid purple smudges underlined his eyes, and he had lost weight, which showed most in the too-tight skin over his hands, the flesh there looked stretched, as if he placed naked bones and not fingers on the greasy banister. Nobody spoke, leaving the echo of Mr. Morningside's voice to dance among the dust motes until Dalton returned and stepped out from around me and presented himself, staring up at Mr. Morningside before giving a short, polite bow. "Hello, Henry. Did you miss me?" Mr. Morningside's nostrils flared considerably, and he stiffened, giving me a glare that said clearly I was somehow to blame for Dalton Spicer's appearance. Perhaps I was, but I had not forced anyone to come, and the bad blood between the two men was their own sordid business. But more and more I knew how Mr. Morningside's mind worked, and if he could find a grudge to lay at someone's feet, he would do it with pleasure. Either that, or he sensed Spicer's and my fragile allegiance to one another and wanted simply to drive a wedge in our friendship. "Did I miss you?" Henry scoffed, and then he produced a handkerchief, wiping idly at the neglected banister. "How long ago was Hungary, dear me? Has it already been 200 years? Goodness, Dalton, what an extraordinary idea, that I would long for a pebble in my boot, a fly in my porridge, a bee in my eye." "We get it, you're not friendly," I muttered, rolling my eyes at his theatrics. "Be that as it may, I happened to notice a few changes since I left. Most noticeably that the house is in shambles, the doors are barricaded, and there are upwalders attacking at random. Oh, and here's something fun for you. We were chased halfway across the county by a dragon lion the size of Whitby. Anything sound amiss there, and possibly more important than an ancient spat?" Mr. Morningside lifted his brows, retaking my measure, or more accurately, reassessing me. As an adversary, perhaps, or as a former employee with a vengeful god locked in her head. He wound his way languidly down the stairs, pausing at the bottom one to smirk. "You haven't been paying attention, Louisa. All of this," he gestured to the floor, the ceiling, and us, "is nothing but ancient spat after ancient spat. Generally, I can't even remember what it is we're fighting about." I strode toward him, furious, but Dalton stopped me from throttling him on the staircase. "Oh, you smug you! You liar! You and the shepherd tried to murder all of my people, and then you had a sliver of conscience and enough spine to feel sorry about it. Now you're taking sides and still losing by the looks of it." Mr. Morningside feigned a choking noise and pressed his palm over his heart. "Louisa, you vanquish me, have mercy. Very well, we are somewhat compromised here, but the shepherd will stop eventually. He doesn't have the stomach for direct conflict. No, he rather prefers," and here he fixed his gaze deliberately on Dalton's subterfuge. "I've taken no sides, Henry," Dalton said, putting his hands up in surrender. "There is no love between you and me, but likewise I disagree with the shepherd's methods. You don't know what it's like in London. His followers are spreading everywhere. They found Louisa and attacked her right out in the open, in front of half of London society. Good God, Henry, he sent Sparrow after her. For the first time since our return." Henry looked legitimately taken aback. "Oh, and she's dead," I said. "We had to defend ourselves." "Now that is interesting," Henry drawled. He glanced with sparkling yellow eyes at Mary and Kent, nodding. "You three make a formidable little army. Fortunately for us, you escaped the riffraff in town. Your timing is appreciated. Where are Lee and Mrs. Hallam?" Mary piped up, her arm linked with Chidioke's. "They are not. Are they well?" Mr. Morningside took the final step off the staircase, waving away Mary's questions with his handkerchief. He had at last noticed Mother, and nothing in the world could have torn his attention away from her as he took short, slow steps in her direction. "They're counting beans in the larder," he said. "Supplies have been scarce since the shepherd began his campaign. But who is this? That is what I want to know. Who is this?" It must have been a leftover protective instinct from when she was a very small, very crushable spider, but I leapt in front of her. She did not move me aside, yet placed an infinitely caring hand on my shoulder. I knew without a glance that she was smiling over my head at Henry. With her other hand she lifted her veil, and I watched him go pale and gasp. "Greetings, Dark One. It has been too long, Mr." Morningside struggled to come up with a response, then swallowed hard and swept her, and I suppose me, a bow. "He looks nervous," I said under my breath to Dalton. He smirked. "Henry has been keeping Dark Fae here under contract, hasn't he? They're practically prisons. Now Mother has returned. I would be sweating if I were him, too." "No," I told him, still softly. "They like working here." "Do they?" Dalton lifted a brow. "Will they still think that way when Henry shows his true colors? He's fooled everyone this long. It won't go on forever," Dalton whispered. "It can't." Henry, meanwhile, kept a weather eye on Mother. "Gracious me, how long has it been?" His voice was too high to be casual. 700 years, 8. "Longer," she said. "Indeed, Mr." Morningside stuffed his handkerchief away and fussed with his blue cravat. "And the nature of this visit?" Mother's other hand landed on my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth of her skin through my cloak and dress. "I am here for Louisa. Father's twisted spirit resides in her, and there is reason to believe you or one of your kind may know how to change that. Help her, Star of the Morning, and there will be no quarrel between us." The smallest flicker of darkness flitted across his eyes. It was there and then gone so quickly, I couldn't be certain I'd seen it at all. The corner of his mouth twitched, and his hand went still on his cravat. A plan had begun forming in his head, and if that hint of darkness was to be believed, it was nothing good. "Of course," he said, his face splitting with a wide, white smile. "Anything for a dear, old friend." I crept silently into the kitchens, anxious to find Lee, though decidedly less interested in running across Mrs. Hallam. She had been my introduction to the house, but she'd never warmed to me. All along she must have suspected something, that I was not just a wayward girl, recently escaped from school, but part of this world beneath the world. I was beginning to suspect that she was the Ara mentioned frequently in Dalton's diary. The physical description, particularly her many strange markings, fit, and so did the sour attitude. There was no sign of Mrs. Hallam and her severe, iron-coloured hair, always neatly in a bun, nor sound of her sharp voice. I heard only a rustling coming from the pantry to the left, and I rounded the tall table near the stoves, a place I had sat many, many times for meals. On good days at Coldthistle House, those meals had felt like family suppers, but now the kitchen was hollow with loneliness, the windows grimy and grey, as if the place had not heard laughter or cheer in years. A large, rough hole had been dug through the tiles near the door leading to the lawn, and when I drew closer, I could see it ran deep. I found Lee in the pantry, his back to me, golden curls slicked back from his head with sweat as he feverishly stacked jars of dried goods. Those jars might have been far heavier, but most of them were only a quarter full. Lee whispered to himself, keeping a constant tally of what he shifted from the left side of the pantry to the right. "Need help?" I was exhausted, but then he seemed tired and harried, too. Lee started, dropping the jar he was carrying, but only a few inches. Luckily, it did not shatter. I rushed forward and caught it before it could tip, righting the heavy crock of pickled green beans. Lee blinked at me in the low light of the pantry. A single lantern had been placed on a shoulder-high shelf, making the left side of his face glow orange. "Are you often in the habit of rescuing young men and their beans?" he asked. I said with a sad smile. "I feel gallant now." It had been almost 2 years since he swept my spoon out of the mud, but we had changed far more than 2 years warranted. That same spoon, I saw now slightly bent from rough handling, was hanging around his neck, dangling out the open neck of his shirt. Out of impulse or shock, he rocked toward me, pulling me into a tight embrace. I was glad for it and sighed with relief. Even road-weary, I feared being alone with my thoughts. Father was quiet, but he could always return. There was going to be no pulling Mary and Chijioke apart for some time, and Kent had promised to keep an eye on Mother while I looked in on Lee. Dalton had agreed to apprise Mr. Morningside of all that had occurred between Sparrow's attack and the present moment, a conversation that I had little interest in joining. The chilliness between them was palpable, and I was in no rush to tell Mr. Morningside I had been reading his friends' personal accounts of their former adventures. "I knew you would come back," Lee said, pulling away and holding me at arm's length. "You've come just in time, Louisa. Everything has gone upside down." "It's the same in London," I told him, taking the jar of beans and hoisting it onto his stack. "We were all but chased out of the city. I have no idea if the shepherd wanted to force us here or just to eliminate us altogether." His eyes widened. "Mary and Kent have come with me," I told him. "And the spider, too, only it's not a spider anymore but Father's counterpart, and she's called, well, Mother, obviously. Mr. Morningside's old Upwelder friend has tagged along. He says he wants to help me get rid of Father's spirit inside me, but I have no idea if that's true. Perhaps I ought to take a page out of Dalton's own diary and see if Bartholomew couldn't divine his intentions. If only I had known the dog's gift earlier, I might have saved myself a lot of trouble at Coldthistle." "Goodness," Lee murmured. "You had a busy summer." "So have you, from the looks of it," I said. "It was quiet for a while after you left," he explained, sitting on the stack of jars and sighing. He ruffled his curls with one hand and leaned back. "But then it all went to hell. Birds all over the county started dropping dead. Figures started watching us from the property boundary. Day and night you would see them standing there, waiting for something. Then, a fortnight ago, they began crossing over, and one almost carried Chijioke off. It's horrible, Louisa, but I'm terribly glad you're here." Mr. Morningside has not been himself. The way he gazed up at me, so expectantly, made me nauseated with fear. I couldn't crush his expectations. "He did look a bit peaky," I said. Lee shook his head, curls rustling. No, it's more than that. He's cross with us all the time. I knew he could have a prodigious temper, but now we're the target of it too. I'm sorry." It was all I could think to say. "He's in open conflict with the shepherd. He must be worried that he could lose." "But how?" Lee scratched thoughtfully at his chin. "He has hundreds of souls trapped in birds, and he must be powerful himself. I don't understand why he hasn't fought back, why he hasn't made Mrs. Hallam raise shadows or some such." "I couldn't possibly know his mind," I said. But Lee had a point. Why was he waiting to mount a proper defense? I had never known Mr. Morningside to be meek or retreating, so why the sudden change? "Listen, Lee, I don't know his mind, but I'll do what I can to help. We all will. I just need to be careful. Father's spirit is dangerous, and I frighten myself when he takes control. He's out for blood." "Good," Lee said, furrowing his brow. "When we first met, I could never have imagined him becoming bloodthirsty, but death and living as a man of shadow had changed him. It would change anybody. Those Upwalders are more than a nuisance. They won't hesitate to hurt us. Why should we be any different?" He had a point, of course, and I didn't know what they had experienced in my absence, but I did know what it was like to be hounded and hunted. "There may be a better way to solve this," I said. "You might want bloodshed now, but trust me, you will quickly tire of it. Killing, even out of pure defense, it maims your spirit. Pull the wings off a butterfly, pull off its legs, and what do you have left?" Lee stood, glowering, and pushed his way past me out of the palm tree. "Well, if you refuse to help us, maybe Kent and Mary will." "That's not what I meant, Lee. I'm only advising caution. I was responsible for Sparrow's death. Nobody liked her, maybe, but it opened a wound in me all the same, I said. That slowed his steps, and he hung his head, shaking it. She is really gone, he whispered. I should be relieved to hear she's gone. Just her very presence made me sick to my stomach, and she hated us, but... Damn it all. I should look in on the others, I said, walking slowly toward the open doorway to the foyer. Mr. Morningside seems to be in a strange mood, and having another ancient god in the house with him makes me nervous. Lee hunched, gripping his stomach, wincing and stumbling forward until he could put one hand on the high table. What's the matter? I asked, going to him. His brow perspired. Are you ill? Upwilders, he said through gritted teeth. They are near. I only feel that way when they come. Dalton is one of them, but estranged. Maybe you sense him in the house. No. It's too sharp to be just one of them. It feels more like when Finch and Sparrow first turned up together. They are beings of light, Louisa, and I'm a creature of shadow now. Light pierces shadow. It's torment when they're stalking us. Come, I said, taking him gently by the arm. We should tell the others. You don't have to fight them on your own anymore. Our strength is yours. Chapter 17. 1247, The Road East. What do you make of him? I'd done my level best to avoid Ara when I could. Henry was arguably more powerful and more dangerous, but Henry liked me. Or loved me. It depended on the day, sometimes the hour. But Henry's and my good-natured alliance against Ara's, shall we say, test in nature shifted once Faraday joined us. He had shaken off the name Fokker, donning human clothes and human sandals, draping himself in a sand-coloured smock and a beaded belt, a hood that shadowed his face, coal smudged across his eyes. He kept his injured hands deep inside his sleeves and wrapped linens over the places where his fingers were missing. I've had truck with shadows more solid than he is, Ara said one night, crouching on a rug beside our fire. The road to Tuzgl was hilly but not unkind, and the passage of autumn into winter afforded us cooler climates for the journey. There was even a chill on the air that night, and I was grateful for the heat of the pup snuggled in my lap. His heart is there. Ara pounded her fist over her chest, leaving flecks of soot, but it isn't there. Do you know what I mean? What did Henry do to him? I asked. Besides the obvious. He's a thrall now, human, I suppose, but less than that. The book is what makes us, what allows and feeds our power, and Maskims, I'll ask the Black Albion to strip him bare. She glanced over her shoulder at the two men who watered the horses, deep in conversation. Or rather, Henry pelted Faraday with questions, and the other man shrank and mumbled. Once a commander of dark legions, he will now be little more than a stable boy. I shuddered, eyes wandering to her pack and the heavy black book I knew lay within. I hate when you call him that. Why? She cackled and stirred the cauldron on the fire. Because it reminds you of his true self, because it reminds you why you should sleep in your own tent. It's quite honestly none of your business, Ara, and it baffles me that you deign to care. The hand stirring the pot went still. Watch your tone, Upwilder. You're vastly outnumbered and far from home. I shrugged, well accustomed to her empty threats. While Henry remained near, she would not attempt anything. You seem to know much about the books. Did Henry interrogate you, too? Ara went back to her cooking, adding a dash of something into the cauldron. What I know, he knows. The only difference is that I have a healthy fear of the answers he so boldly seeks. Fokker paid a steep price for his knowledge, I pointed out. I can only pray we won't owe the same. We will, and worse, she said. Fokker is a fool, and he paid only a fool's price. Henry should know better than to chase this rabbit, and so he will follow it down the hole and never come back out. Henry's voice suddenly rose, but I could not make out the words. His brows were knit with anger, and he used his height to loom over Faraday, trapping him against a large stone outcropping. I couldn't help taking pity on the poor sod, and I shuffled Bartholomew off my lap, excused myself, and crossed the camp to where the two men stood. So she asked you that, and you said what? I could not think of the answer, and she. Oh, but it was horrible. Faraday shivered against the rock and stuffed his hands deeper into his sleeves. My word, you're simple. But then demons usually are. It's not even that hard of a riddle. Moving on. What was the next question? Henry, the food is practically finished. Could you not allow him a moment to recover? He shot me a silencing glare and put his hand on the rock next to Faraday's head, leaning in. The poor man looked like he might tremble to pieces. The next riddle, what was it? Our arms to embrace, yet no hands, Faraday stammered, swallowing hard. Pinches to give, yet no fingers. Poison to wield, yet no needle. Please tell me you managed to get that one, Henry muttered. Please. I did. Faraday shook his head, turning to me with a pleading look. At least, I thought I did. How could it be the wrong answer, she asked, and I was so sure then she bit me. And it went on and on. I didn't know the others, but she wouldn't stop. More questions, more biting. I think she enjoyed watching me struggle. No, we are too close to the salt. We should not even be speaking of this. I mustn't speak the word. But Henry sighed, clucking his tongue. Shall I fetch the book? Henry, please. I was well beyond exasperation. This was torture, and the former demon was leading us to the salt and seemed to be cooperating with Henry's questions. It was horrid enough thinking about bringing him back to the place where he had lost so much, and Henry could not spare even an ounce of pity for the creature. Tell me what you answered, and I will. I'll let you eat, Henry muttered, then curled his lip in my direction. Happy? Not exactly. Faraday's sleeves rippled, and I could imagine him gripping his own arms with what remained of his fingers. At least we could stop this torment in a moment, and I vowed silently to try to protect Faraday from Henry's prodding. The irony of it, an upworlder shielding a demon from his own master. Though I had to admit, I was somewhat curious. The riddle's key seemed obvious enough to me, and I possessed no aptitude for puzzles. They had been speaking in Greek for my benefit, but Faraday fell back on his native tongue, sweating as he cowered against the rock and spoke. I felt the wind come and shake the grass and trees even before he answered. Zukaku, he whispered. Scorpion, said Henry, for my benefit. What are you doing? Ara leapt up from the fire, upsetting the cauldron and sending stew cascading over the hissing coals. Her robes flowed around her as she ran toward us, still wielding the long wooden cooking spoon. I told you to be careful. I told you. Faraday was right. We were too close to the salt, and the scorpion's malevolent presence seemed to prove that he had indeed unearthed something monstrous there. I heard him cry out and fall to the ground as the harsh, hot wind whipped through the camp, sending sand, dust, and grit into our eyes as it all but sliced us up. The rumbling began after that, a sound like the earth belching forth the flames of a volcano. The explosion had sounded distant, but that didn't matter. I could already hear whatever the underworld had birthed moving swiftly toward us, obliterating the sands as it came. Up to go now. If we are lucky, we can outrun it and lose it in the hills. It will take time for me to summon shadows, but all is not lost. Ara looped back toward the camp, frantic, scooping up her pack and tossing Henry's to him. I grabbed Faraday by the arm and hoisted him to his feet, pulling him along while he wept and apologized. Bartholomew paced at the ruined fire, and I took him up, too, letting Henry manage both of our packs as the four of us made for the road. It doesn't matter, I heard Faraday moan. It's coming. It's already here. We scrambled up the road, running east. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds, and without any light to see by, it was a blind retreat, but the path cut through two hilly clusters of land, thick with shrubs and trees. Ara ran ahead, even burdened by the book. She overtook us, and we followed her up the pass to the right. At last Faraday found some strength in his limbs and climbed next to me, whispering nonsense to himself as the great rumbling strides of the creature behind us neared. It sounded like more than one enemy, but my only intent was to climb. We could face our doom when we had the high ground. The rocks cut into my palms, and the dense shrubs, bushy and sharp with thorns, tore at my tunic. The pain was forgotten, pushed aside by the pounding in my chest. The hilltop was no mountain, but it provided ample places to hide and a vantage. Ara made it first, running only a few steps more before she dropped to her knees and hoisted the black Albion out of her bag. It was her turn to whisper, using the ancient language she and Henry and the demon favored. I saw the book shake on the ground as I crested the hill, its pages rustling. The bushes around are suddenly full of secretive sounds, as if the very shadows had come alive. In fact, they had. I herded the dog against my stomach and curled around it on the ground. Henry was not at all put off by the noises bubbling up from every direction, and instead he strode to the edge of the cliff, leaning over to watch the thing that had followed. "It's hideous," he hissed. "Ara, darling, we have to hurry now." She shushed him, impatient, her hands waving over the book, her voice a low, rasped music that rose and fell. The rocks under us swayed. The creature was ramming itself against the base of the hill, apparently unable to climb. Just above Ara's song, I heard the creature's eerie chattering. I knew not to speak of it. I knew. Faraday hugged himself, rocking back and forth in the dirt beside me. "Hush," I told him. "Let her concentrate." I had never seen Ara at work, but it was a thing of strange beauty. As her song reached its peak, she produced a knife from inside her robes and slashed at her hand. She made a fist as if to hold the blood there, and then threw it outward in a fan. The blood never hit the ground, hovering there in the air before the shadows seethed out of the bushes to consume the offering. Her blood gave them form, and soon a dozen or so faces of shifting black stared at her as if the night itself had come to life to do her bidding. "Adnika Hisnu," she commanded, waving her arms frantically. I didn't speak the language perfectly, but I knew what she had asked: protection. Please, protection. With dragging feet, the shadows rushed by in single file and vanished over the edge of the hill, moving with silent, unnatural speed. I crept to my knees and then stood joining Henry at the ledge. Ara remained on the ground, holding her wounded hand to her chest and breathing deep. "They can only be a distraction," Henry said, somber. "What is it?" I asked him. "What pursues us?" His eyes gleamed even in the total darkness as he turned away from the edge. There was a guilty hunch to his shoulders. Perhaps finally he had realized the cost of this quest. "I've never seen anything like it before, love. We will need all of our courage for what is to come." Lee's upset stomach proved prophetic. After alerting Mr. Morningside and Dalton to the possible presence of upholders on the property, we mustered on top of the east tower in one of the dusty, rarely used bedrooms that had been draped with cloths to keep the moths and dirt at bay. The furniture shrouded, the floors bare of carpets, it felt like a suitably desolate setting for what we found outside. The tall, mullioned windows faced the fields that, far in the distance, held the shepherd's house, a modest shack I had once stumbled upon by accident. Of much more pressing concern, however, was a line of adjudicators waiting just across the rickety fence separating the two properties. Most of the fence had been knocked down, but a few narrow posts remained here and there. The yard was pocked with deep holes, and I wondered if one of those led to the other end of the tunnel I'd glimpsed through the massive gape in the kitchen floor. "He's mad as a bag of ferrets if he thinks I'm going to take that bait, Mr. Morningside grunted. He stood with crossed arms at the window, all of his employees and visitors beside him except Mrs. Hallam. She arrived in a bustle of skirts and muttered complaints, then paused when she caught sight of us all amassed at the windows. Out in the hall behind her lurked two blurry black shapes. Residents. The shadows given life prowled in her wake, drifting by the open doorway but not entering. Mrs. Hallam had abandoned her apron, wearing only a sober, dark frock with a knit muffler around her neck. The spare months between now and when I'd last seen her had aged her significantly. She had previously looked like a proud but gnarled old tree, dark of skin but with a severe kind of beauty. Now she simply seemed weathered, her milky eye so pale it almost glowed in the dimly lit bedroom. When her good eye fell on Dalton, she drew up short. It was as if someone had dropped a solid block between them, for she would go no farther. She spat. "Hello, old girl," Dalton greeted, turning to face her, though the fabric over his eyes hid much of his expression. "We are not so desperate that we need your aid," she said, sniffing. "And the problem child has returned, too. I might have known. My every bone has ached for hours, an ill omen of the fools darkening our doorstep." "We are indeed that desperate, mister," Morningside said. "There are adjudicators across the fence, and the shepherd flushed this lot out of London with fires and dragons, and the pit only knows what else. It would seem he wants us all in one location. Convenient, no?" I chewed my cheek, ignoring the searing look Mrs. Hallam tossed my way. If I needed her help to rid myself of father, I would sweeten my tone later, but that was a problem for another moment. In the meantime, I feared Mr. Morningside was right. "Do you suppose he knows we're here?" I asked. "Doubtful. If he did, he would send more than that pitiful lot," Mr. Morningside replied. He leaned closer to the window, squinting. "This may just be a warning. Or scouts. They didn't look to be in a hurry, merely pacing up and down the fence. After my battle with Sparrow, the thought of facing 4 adjudicators, even with more allies of my own, lodged a lump in my throat. Mr. Morningside, for all his boasting, had to be afraid. There was no mistaking the state of Cold Thistle House. It was a wonder they were still alive, with adjudicators attacking the property at random. They would certainly need us to survive the coming storm. "Kent," I said gently, "stay here with Lee, Mary, and Chidioke. Tell me if anything changes. I need to have a word with my former employers." He nodded solemnly and stood still, but I could tell he itched to follow. "What's this now, mister?" Morningside asked, cocking a brow. "You will see. We should talk terms somewhere more private," I added, gesturing for Mother and Dalton to accompany me. "Terms, mister." Morningside tasted the word and sneered. "I'm sure he would have much preferred I called it a deal, and I would, if that was what he required. Time was too short and my need too great to worry about such details." Mrs. Hallam remained rigid near the door, watching me closely as I strode by her and out into the corridor. The attic space down the hall, while not glamorous, would have to suffice. Residents drifted up and down in the flickering light of the sconces, then came together to follow me, so close that I could feel the cold that rolled off them like the breath of winter. The large ballroom where I had first found the black book was not far off, but I doubted the book remained there. It was only reasonable that after the events of the spring, Mr. Morningside would take greater pains to hide it. The attic, sneezy and dark, grew dimmer still when the residents floated in. They seemed to suck the dismal light from every corner and soak it into their blurred bodies. Mrs. Hallam entered last, carrying with her a short candelabra with fragrant yellow candles. The light held beneath her chin exaggerated every deep crack in her face. With adjudicators gathering at the property's edge, I dispensed with pleasantries. "I want father's spirit out of me," I told him and Mrs. Hallam bluntly. "If Chidioke can do it, fine, but something tells me it will be more complicated than his usual ceremony. Far more complicated, I should think, Mr. Morningside said, propping one elbow on his hand, knuckles tucked under his chin. "But not impossible." I glanced at Mother, and from behind her veil she smiled back. "I have a number of souls stored," he continued. "The birds, of course. We can choose one of the less unsavory types and use their essence. Perhaps Amelia Canny or the Italian Countess, if you're in the mood for something more dangerous. Otherwise," and here he peered between Mother and Dalton, "we will require a volunteer, but that seems unnecessary. You will need to be brought to the point of death again," Mrs. Hallam said steelily. "A simple task. And how you will enjoy that," I thought. "Very well," I replied. "That sounds agreeable. Well, not agreeable, but possible. In return, I will ask that my companions help you defend against the shepherd's forces. You will need our help to survive. You will do more than that." Mr. Morningside grinned, then grinned wider when my face fell. What you're asking is complicated and risky, Lusa, and the trouble is that you will need us for it. Therefore, we must survive. Therefore, what you are offering is the bare minimum and not at all interesting to me. Here we go, I heard Dalton mutter, crossing his arms. Or you might help Lusa because it is the kind thing to do. Mother drifted forward, removing her veil. It was always startling how strange and beautiful she looked with her inky purple skin and 8 delicate pink eyes. Even Mr. Morningside could not tear his eyes away from her. She is suffering greatly. Father's spirit is poison, and it is killing her with its cruelty. How tragic, Mrs. Hallam drawled. She was gifted the powers of a god. That she cannot control and understand them is unfortunate but not our problem. It will be, I shot back, taking a step toward her. When I pack up my toys and go home. Back to London, back to the angry mobs with torches, Mr. Morningside sighed, but it was all theatrics. Oh, Lusa, you are in our game now, and in this game, running only takes you to the edge of the board, it does not remove you as a piece. He had me cornered, and I knew it, but I hated losing to him this way. Ask what you will, then, I whispered, not afraid anymore to look him straight in the eye, to challenge the devil himself. But I will not agree to anything until I know exactly what you require. I'm afraid it involves another book. He didn't seem at all bothered by my glowering. In fact, he had turned his attention to Dalton. For some reason, that frightened me more. Only this time you won't be translating it, Mr. Morningside said with a wink. You'll be destroying it. Chapter 18. My first thought was that Mr. Morningside meant Dalton's diary, that he wanted it gone, but of course it could not be that simple. You have no idea what you're asking, Dalton said, shaking his head and brushing by me, standing up to Henry. They were of equal height and similar frame, though they were different in nearly every other respect. With Mr. Morningside's dark hair and Dalton's ginger complexion, they were like ice and fire. On the contrary, I know just what I'm asking. Mr. Morningside dodged around him, languidly, his shoulder brushing the other man's. I saw Dalton flinch at the proximity. What else would you have me do? The shepherd has gone plumb mad. We had a nice enough arrangement going. It's a pity he had to ruin it. Lusa tells me you've been amassing a bloody army of souls, Henry. Perhaps that ruined it, Is all this bickering necessary, Mrs. Hallam pinched her forehead, going to the window behind us and setting down the candelabra. Dalton will produce the white book and see it destroyed, or he will leave, and he will take poor Lusa with him. She had said it with such finality that we were all silent for a moment. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Of course, it was completely in line with Mr. Morningside's usual tricks, but even for him this seemed extreme. Destroy the book, I breathed. Is that even possible? It is, Mr. Morningside replied breezily. Dalton knows it too. I waited for Dalton to say something, rubbing my hands nervously across my skirt. What does that do if the book is gone? I mean, what will happen? We upholders, the shepherd, he choked a little on his words and closed his eyes. We will all cease to exist. Oh, I said, remembering part of the diary. The book is what gives all of you power. Father consumed our book, which is why we dark fae are still here. Precisely. Mr. Morningside looked grim, suddenly, as if the weight of what he was asking had finally sunk in. What would you have me do, Spicer? The shepherd is out of control. Do you see anyone else setting up cults all over London? He wants us dead. Dalton grunted. No, he wants you contained. He wants us dead. Mr. Morningside rounded on him, sticking a pointed finger into his face with a sneer. You've lived long enough and look miserable doing it. You've always hated the game, so now you're invited to leave it. Destroy the book, and I help the girl. Nobody moved. For a moment, I was convinced Dalton might strike him. His entire body had gone too still, frozen with rage, his cheeks dark red. His eyes were covered, but had they been visible and whole, they might have been shooting flames. A tremor began in his right leg, but he stopped it and slowly, carefully, took a step back. Mr. Morningside lowered his hand but otherwise waited his terms given. Mother and I watched the upholder go with weary steps to the door, where he paused and put one hand on the frame, leaning away from the residents that gathered there to watch and loom. "You didn't have to make this personal, Henry," he whispered. "Yes, Mr. Morningside replied, adjusting his cravat. "Yes, you made certain that I did. You don't have to do this." I found Dalton Spicer out on one of the narrow balconies attached to the green suite. Like the other rooms on that floor, its furniture had been covered and left abandoned. There were no guests at Coldthistle House, and though the people who were drawn to it had committed great evils, the place still felt emptier and colder for their absence. He stood with his back to me, night draped around him, his palms resting on a railing still damp with rain. I watched him trace shapes into the droplets for a moment, and then he regarded the forest. The balcony faced north, toward the hidden spring and the woods where I had first encountered Kent when he attacked me and my father, who had been masquerading as Mary. "There must be something else he wants," I pressed. "We can find a way to bargain with him." "No," he laughed. "You don't know him like I do. Once he sets his mind to something, he gets it, no matter the consequences. I've been reading the diary, and I must say it's disturbing. All the riddles and violence," I said, standing half inside still for the meager warmth. "Why didn't Mr. Morningside turn back so much pointless danger?" Dalton pulled away the covering over his eyes and inhaled deeply, rubbing his face, lifting his nose to the cold night air. "When I met him, he was a different man. Not kinder, not wiser, but more malleable. I let that hang between us for a moment, and then I said, 'Mother tells me father changed too. That the war among all of you broke something in him.' He gave a wry smile at that and tilted his head toward me. 'Yes, yes, that's it exactly. I think it broke Henry too, but he covers it well. When I first met him, it was at a meeting between him and the shepherd. They were forging an alliance, a temporary one, to punish the father of trees for overreaching. Henry had this frictionless poise. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was dangerous, yes, but he listened. He compromised. He listened," I snorted. "Then, God, he really was different. You have no idea." Dalton placed the fabric back over his eyes and scrubbed one hand over his mouth as if trying to wipe something invisible away. "After we Upwalders hunted down the dark fae, your people, Henry stopped listening. He stopped compromising. I think he realized he was going to live forever, and living forever with that much guilt requires a heart of stone." "Is that why he wanted to know so much about the books?" I asked. Dalton took my meaning and nodded. He saw his life stretching out before him, a long, long forever of a life, always burdened by what we had done to your folk. He had tried living with that stone heart and decided it was better to shatter the thing and be done. It wasn't just knowledge he was seeking in the Salt Flats, it was his own annihilation. Did Ara know? Is that why she kept trying to stop him? At that, he chuckled and ran his palm flat through the rain on the banister. "No, she didn't know, not at first. Neither did I. She doesn't think that way. Mrs. Hallam would happily lie forever with the death of millions on her shoulders. She's simply made of stronger stuff." "No," I said, plunging out into the cold to stand beside him. "That isn't strength at all. I don't think there's a word for what that is. Anyway," he shrugged. "She's too callous, too selfish to think Henry might endanger himself or her. Never, ever be fooled by her temperament, Louisa. She worships the ground on which he walks." I watched him fiddle with the raindrops for a moment longer. "But he didn't ask you to destroy the Black Book?" "No. I think, strange as it may be, that he's quite fond of this house and those he employs. Destroying the Albion would be their downfall, too. Where would they go? He's protected them for so long, and you've seen how dangerous it can be." My brows rose at that. "Awfully sentimental," I said. "For the devil. Maybe they ease his loneliness. That's worth something." I imagine it's depressing, conversing with birds all day, and he long ago chased demons like Faraday out of his life. Too miserable to be around, even for demons. It was growing too cold to stay outside, and I longed for sleep. The adjudicators, or so it seemed, had yet to make their move. The iciness in my gut had eased, and I wondered if they had left delaying their attack. Maybe the shepherd sensed we had come, or that Dalton had, and had chosen to re-strategize. And Henry knows how to destroy the books. Where to go? I asked, lingering in the door. Yes. The riddles. He knows the answers to them, the correct answers. Dalton sighed. All but one. Finish the diary, Louisa, you will see. I lost track of Henry for so long, it wouldn't surprise me if he learned more of the riddles on his own. Or he sent Mrs. Hallam to investigate. She would do anything he asked. Somehow, he has that way about him, convincing others to give up everything for him. Only it's a hollow promise, and there's no reward at the end. As I watched, he crumbled toward the balcony, holding himself upright tentatively. I wasn't welcome or needed, and I backed into the house, hugging myself. You're going to do it, aren't you? I whispered. Yes, he said, turning his face away from the sky. Yes, it'll help you destroy the White Book. Chapter 19. 1247. The Road East. Screams, hollow and damned as the void, trailed after us down the road. Ara's shadow creatures had been left to fend for themselves, but those high, terrible wails told us of their fate. So soon, she whispered as we ran. How is it possible? Their sacrifice was soon forgotten as we heard the impending thunder and the quaking of the ground beneath our feet. The stretch of land beside the road was uneven and treacherous, and our lead was swiftly lost. How the creature had circled behind the road and come back upon us before we'd even run a quarter mile soon became clear, for we travelled on 2 legs while our pursuer tracked us on 8. I have seen many wondrous and terrible creatures in my day, but never something so grotesque. It surged ahead, rounding, blocking our path, the size across of 3 men, and as tall as 5. Its body long, curved, and segmented was that of a scorpion's, a fade brown color translucent as parchment, the veins and organs within throbbing and red. It reeked of deep earth, with clay and bits of mud and sand still falling from its head and tail as it clacked its massive pincer arms together. A human stomach, chest, and head rose from the body, sharing the oddly thin skin, heart pulsing and pumping before our eyes. The pointed barb of its tail swayed back and forth, preparing to strike. I would have appealed to it but for the shock that rooted me to the ground. Even frozen, I would have begged it with my eyes, but that was no use, for it had none of its own to see me. Its pointed legs carried it backward and forward a beat, and I felt Henry's hand clasp mine, squeezing. Take your golden form, he breathed. I fear this is no creature of reason. Indeed, it was not, and before I could so much as summon the breath and will to drop my human guise, the creature dashed forward. It barreled toward us with sharp, bulbous pincers aiming for a single target. Faraday. I was still holding on to the man's wrist, but that ended abruptly as he was torn from my grasp and carried, legs kicking, to a rocky outcropping, the one we had just used as our high ground. We spun to face him, but I dared not follow. Not yet. The fear was too deep. We have to do something, I whispered. We have to help him. Without another thought, I started forward, ripping my hand out of Henry's as the creature pinned Faraday to the stone. It held him there without trouble, and for an instant Faraday fought against the massive claw, pushing and flailing, trying to land a single kick against the human stomach. Behind me, Henry screamed something desperate, terrified, but I would not let fear trap me into inaction. The demon had suffered enough, he did not deserve this. But even as I pumped my arms and ran as quickly as I could, the beast lowered its pale, thin lips to Faraday's face and snapped its teeth once. Then it spoke, and its voice nearly stopped me again. It was not a thing that was made to use human speech, and the words squeezed out like the gurgle of water through mud. What were you told in the salt? It snapped its teeth again. What were you told? and never to speak of what I saw, never to repeat what I heard. Please uphold the Dark One, you must help me. Faraday shrieked and reached toward me, but even the might of my wings, once unfurled, couldn't carry me to him with enough speed. Slip. I will never forget the sound. The creature squeezed its pincer together once, hard, like two sides, severing Faraday in the soft middle, his legs dropping to the ground before his torso did a moment later, his eyes wide with surprise. I dropped to my knees, and the creature spun to face me. Whatever sight it used, I know it saw me there, and its head lowered as if it wished to say more. Then it shook out its claw, spattering me and the dirt with blood, and it gave a high, eerie cry like lily, and then it was gone, vanishing into the hills, the only sign of its true departure another hot wind and the rumble of tunneled earth. Returning to my old quarters in Cold Thistle House came with a disarming wave of comfort. My little bed, my old, rickety side table, the long looking-glass where I had first beheld myself in the simple frock and apron that would become my day-to-day wear. It felt possible to slide back into that old life, to wake each morning and see to my chores, cleaning blood out of carpets, helping Chidjo call corpses down to the wagon, feeding the horses and buttering scones for guests, all there just out of reach, an existence that spun in time like a dancer in a music box. My life, but not. A future, a path, but not. I stood at the foot of the bed and touched the blankets carefully, as if this were all a mirage and might shimmer and break at the faintest touch. For a brief time, I had known the stability and routine that most young women of my station longed for, a position that ensured I would eat, that I would sleep sheltered, and that I would put a bit of money away, maybe one day to be spent upon a paltry dowry. That was another Louisa. I went to the looking-glass and smoothed down my hair. It was in a tangle from our mad dash to the house, and my gown, torn and muddied, would need replacing. Staring into my own dark eyes, I wondered, not for the first time, if like the damned guests of Cold Thistle House, I, too, had been lured here by a dark promise. They were ultimately met with death, but I seemed destined for something else. Death will be your promise if you do not open your eyes, girl. I watched in the mirror as the room filled from the bottom with greyish fog, the mist rising above my ankles and then to my knees. There was nothing in the reflection, but I turned toward the voice and gasped, finding myself face-to-face with Father. He towered above me, his image unsettled, half the fake human form of Croydon Frost, the other half his true appearance. A gruesome deer's skull protruded from the human skin, bone forcing its way through flesh. His suit was in tatters, transforming as it fell into the black rags and leaves of Father's robes. Tufts of human hair clung to the lopsided antlers that poked from his naked skull. He smelled of death, but then that was no surprise. I backed up against the looking-glass, bracing. Close now, he seethed, eyes two glowing red coals. So close now. My ashes, my body, the tree that sprung from my earthly leavings. This is not a dream, I breathed, nor a nightmare. How can this be? Foolishly, I reached out to touch him, to know for certain that he was real and not an illusion. My palm sank through his chest as if he were made of colored smoke. But when I tried to pull my hand back, it wouldn't budge. His image held me there, his hands wrapping around my wrist. A binder's mark. He stared, transfixed by the no legible lettering on my palm. Then his crimson eyes flew to mine. You freed Mother. You survived a binder. You are stronger than I thought, daughter. Daughter. Now I was not girl or fool or child, but daughter. Release me, I whispered, and be gone. I am stronger than you know, and my friends are here with me. Friends, he laughed, but it was like the cackle of a raven in the gloom. What need do you have for friends when my spirit grows powerful? Go. Go to the tree. Carve the bark, drink its sap, and there will be no dawn for the shepherd and his ilk. No. The word was there, just on my tongue, but no matter how hard I struggled to say it, my lips clamped shut. I felt the world go blurry around the edges, and my balance trembled, flecks of red dancing across my sight. The crimson veil was dropping again, Father's influence too strong now to resist. It had been a mistake to come. I had not considered that being near to his physical form would somehow embolden his claim over me, but it did. My struggle was valiant but brief, for there was no resisting the tendrils that curled, steady and painful, into my brain. The world went by as if imagined. Nothing seemed real. I felt my feet carry me out of the room and down the stairs, then down again, until I was turning toward the kitchens. The door leading outside was barricaded and too noisy to disturb without being noticed. So I went on hands and knees, and, like a rat in its tunnel, I crawled through the hole Bartholomew had dug under the house, a project he might have started months ago along with all the other holes he had put in the yard. Roots and dirt brushed my cheeks, but I was blind to that, though not unfeeling, the cold earth under my hands slippery, fragrant with grass and loam. Insects, free about their nighttime business, skittered over my hands and ankles, crawling up my back and into my hair, tickling my nape with their horrid little legs. No, no, no. I could not go outside, not when the shepherd's adjudicators could descend at any moment. And if they did, I feared more for them than for me. Father controlled me now, and his wrath upon them would be terrible. My hands clawed and clawed, carrying me through the muddy tunnel until at last I felt a gust of wind against my face, and the way curved upward. I scrambled out of the hole, breathing hard. I must have looked a true terror, covered in grime and insects, my eyes wide and unseeing, my every step guided by the beast in my head. The tree was not far now. I could sense it. Father sensed it, and I trotted, then ran toward it, hurrying right for the eastern border of the property. Surely somebody in the house would notice me and help, or would they be alerted to my presence only when Father succeeded and made war with me as his instrument? Please, I pleaded with him as best I could in my head. Please, let me make my own path. How can you be so unfeeling toward your own daughter? But he was silent, pitiless, and I flinched, feeling suddenly the lowest boughs of the tree brush my face. Impossible! How could it have grown so fast? It had been but a sapling when I left in the spring, but now my hands found its trunk, a full-grown tree, gifted swift life by Father's ashes. He should have cut this accursed thing down, I managed to whisper. Silence, daughter. Carve the bark. Carve it. I had only my hands, and so he forced me to use my fingernails, shards of unyielding wood splintering into my soft palms as I pawed at it like a beast gone mad. Droplets ran down my cheeks, not the cold dew off the leaves but tears, hot and steady. The pain was unimaginable, the mark on my palm pulsing with fire. I carved and I carved, clawing, scratching with what I knew would be raw, bloody fingers come morning. If morning came, my fear redoubled when the pain stopped, numbness spreading through my fingers to my hands and wrists. Blood soaked the sleeves of my ruined gown. But Father was relentless, and I was powerless in the shade of his death-born tree. A mist rose around me, and I felt the stickiness of sap trickling against my skin. The sharp herbal scent almost shocked me into control, but no, the feeling was gone, and the sap covering my hands seemed only to deepen his hold. I stumbled back from the tree, shivering, and bent to lick my fingers. I could already hear the blood pounding in my ears like war drums. The shepherd and his folk would not see another sunrise. Chapter 20. The night would come back to me in fits and starts, fragments of a dream washed red with blood. A cry for help. Bones snapping beneath my fingers. The scent of deep forest, then the reek of fear. A body broken on the floor. Golden feathers scattered like fallen autumn leaves. Someone was holding my hand, but when I tried to sit up I felt the bite of heavy iron chains around my chest and legs. I blinked up at the ceiling, listening to the voices around me fade. The hand in mine was familiar and small. She's awake, and she doesn't look so mean now. Poppy was sitting beside me on the bed. I had another stirring of memory, remembering the times I had woken to her face and voice before. Those times, I had not been strapped down to the bed. My head ached, and I groaned, then accepted a bit of tea from Poppy, who held my head while I sipped. It's very late now, she said. Mother was there, too, standing at the end of the bed watching over us. She never looked tired, as if impervious to the wear of exhaustion. The others all got tired and went away, but I said I would stay with you. Bartholomew, too. The dog gave a huff from somewhere next to the bed. Restrained, I could only crane my head a little. Blessedly, they had changed my gown and done what they could to clean me. At least I did not feel the wretched digging of bugs in my hair. Do I want to know what happened? I murmured. My throat rasped as if filled with nettles. I found you before you could take too much of the sap, Mother told me gently, her hands folded in front of her. She had left her veil somewhere and stood only in a crinkled silk gown. Her bare arms had dune upon dune of muscle. Even so, one of the upholders noticed you among the trees. They could not withstand your fury. All smashed up, Poppy clarified helpfully. Like Mrs. Halam's mushy peas. It took all of us to subdue you, Mother added. Her smile was different now, sad, mournful. I will not leave your side. The risk of Father's influence is too great. The tree, I wheezed. I have seen to it, Mother said. I can speak to the heart of a tree, and that one did not go quietly. It left a rotten wound in the earth. When there is more time I will purify it, and soon his ashes will be washed away by rain and wind. That ought to have pleased me, but my unease remained. If so much as a speck of him persisted, my control over him was in doubt. Even if I remove his spirit, I murmured, closing my eyes and sinking down into the pillow, I still have his blood. My father burned a field of captives alive to imprison you. That kind of darkness, that madness, will it always come out? Mother came around the bedposts, and Poppy made room for her, the two of them side by side, though it was Mother's turn to take my hand. There was no reason to doubt her power, but her touch proved it, inducing a soothing warmth to trickle up from my hand to my chest, releasing the tightness there. He once gave me a bouquet of enchanted snapdragons. When the sun shone on them, they giggled like children, and when night fell they made the dearest snoring sound, she recalled, her smile brightening for an instant. That goodness was in him, too, and I know you have it. Perhaps not, I said, closing my eyes again. I can't seem to stop killing. You will, Louisa. When he is gone and your mind is your own again. I can speak to the heart of trees, yes, but I can speak to the heart of my children, too. She sighed and squeezed my hand tighter. I only fear that the Dark One will try to harness your power to fight Ro. Poppy leaned over and poked at one of the chains around my legs. If we take these off, Louisa can help. I want them to go away and stop being so mean so Bartholomew and I can play in the yard again. I hate being stuck inside all day. It isn't fair I haven't even gotten to do my screams because Mary went to stupid old London. She pouted, sliding onto the floor to curl up with the dog. I may have to unleash him, I told Mother slowly. One more time. If it means I can see him remove, then I will do it. Please try not to be too disappointed. These are my friends, after all, and I would see them protected. Her sad smile returned, and the warmth of her touch narrowly stayed my tears. It was hard to cry when she held my hand. I tried to remember if my own human mother had ever demonstrated such kindness, but no memories surfaced, only shouts outside my bedroom door and my drunk of a father screaming at her while I hid beneath the blankets. Show mercy when you can, Louisa, Mother said, and reached for the first strand of chains, loosening them, for the world is far too short on it. In the morning, I was invited to take my breakfast with Mr. Morningside, though Mother refused to drift far from me. He allowed her to join us in the sitting room just off the main foyer, the place where he had first taught me to change a spoon into whatever my heart desired, but not before I caught the tail end of an argument between him and Dalton. Waiting outside the French doors, I couldn't help eavesdropping, putting a finger to my lips to keep Mother from saying anything. We made a pact, Henry was saying. He sounded murderous, cold. And you broke it in the moment when it mattered most, you broke it. Because you lied. Dalton, on the other hand, was passionate. That's what I do. The house trembled. Dalton's voice came closer. He was just about to leave the sitting room. I backed away, pretending we had just descended the staircase and I hadn't heard the last of their row. "I know," Dalton said, opening the doors but turning his head inward. "To my everlasting regret, I know. And I wish that you would be more than that. That's what a man is, more than his parts, more than his history and his destiny doomed him to be." Dalton had no words for us as he marched away from the salon, turning sharply to take the stairs 2 at a time. I hesitated a moment, listening to his retreating steps, and then tiptoed through the doors to find Mr. Morningside gripping the edge of the breakfast table, his back to us. "A deal over breakfast," he crowed after Mary had brought us a light meal of cheese, fresh bread, and what could be spared of the dried venison. She had resumed her role at the house almost at once, as a distraction, maybe, or habit. Under siege and yet were practically civilized. "Do you think they ate so well while the horse was being rolled into Troy?" "I don't think I care," I said, exhausted. Mother's peaceful presence had helped, but being chained to a bed had made sleep a near impossibility. "If you want to make a deal, then Dalton should be here too." We sat at one of the small tables adjacent to the pianoforte, not far from the windows facing the west. It was the farthest room in the house from the shepherd's property, likely an intentional choice. There had been no signs of activity along the fence, but that made me more nervous. It had all the makings of the calm before the storm, and my foot bounced beneath the table, giddy and alert. "He has already agreed to recover the book," he told us, pouring sugar into his tea and stirring it with deft little circles. He was positively singing with cheer. "Your display last night pushed him over the edge. He came to me early this morning and made his offer. My appetite was not what I expected it to be." Mother did not eat either, but held her teacup as if simply for the pleasure of it. I choked down some of my own but took no interest in the leathery venison. "So Dalton will find the book then. Do we depart for Constantinople? How will we make the journey?" I asked. Mr. Morningside gagged on his scone. "Louisa, you rascal, what makes you ask that?" "Ah." So Dalton had left out the small detail of the diary. I forced myself to take a drink of tea and look casual, but my hands trembled. I wanted to keep my possession of the journal a secret from him for as long as possible. There was every chance that Mr. Morningside would try to rig this deal to his advantage, and I wanted one tiny thing up my sleeve just in case. After all, he had told me himself that I was part of the game, and I needed to act accordingly. "You are in our game now, and in this game, running only takes you to the edge of the board. It does not remove you as a piece. The entrance, the place where the books can be destroyed. It's far to the east, in a salt plain. Dalton told me about it, about you and Mrs. Hallam going there when you were all much younger, just after." I glanced nervously at Mother, but she didn't seem bothered. "Just after the schism." "Ah, so it is Dalton after all who is the rascal." "No matter." "Yes and no, Louisa. There is an entrance at Lake Tuz, but there are many, many entrances. I know of one much closer, in fact. You could be there by morning if you left now on horseback." I nodded and frowned, feigning puzzlement. Yet what he said made sense. When I met the binder at Cadwallader's, it had been in a space that was nowhere, and perhaps this place where Henry wanted us to go was similar, a destination between worlds, hiding somewhere in the shadows. "He also told me there were riddles," I continued. "As part of our arrangement, I want you to give me the answers." "Of course, Mr. Morningside said. Dear Louisa, there's no need to look so cunning. It's my greatest desire that you should enter the tomb of ancients safely and fulfill our bargain." At that, I could not hide my interest. I set down my teacup and leaned slightly toward him across the table while he nonchalantly buttered his scone again. "So you've been inside," I said, repeating his name for the place. "The tomb of ancients." "Inside, no. No, I'm afraid there are certain limitations that prevent me from entering," he said. The sigh of frustration that followed seemed genuine, but then, he was a very talented actor. "You, however, should have no trouble infiltrating, so long as you follow my instructions and use your wits. I can only help you so far, Luisa, for I do not know what awaits you inside. But the books can be destroyed there. Beside me, Mother winced. I was now a book, having Father's knowledge of ours buried in my head, and that meant I, too, could be destroyed there. Yes, it is where the books are created. I know that to be true, Henry said, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. He flecked a bit of crumb off his jacket and fixed me with one of his wide, charming smiles. A curl of black hair fell roguishly in front of his yellow eyes. But we must not discuss it aloud in too much detail. It is a protected place, and I am not eager to call out its guardians. I will write down your instructions, the better to avoid detection. I shuddered at the thought of anyone getting cut in half by an angry scorpion creature. If you insist, Mr. Morningside studied me over his cup, perhaps divining that I knew more than I let on. But he said no more on the subject and drank his too-sweet tea. Then it's settled. I wouldn't say that. How do I know you will uphold your end of the deal? I am risking my life to destroy that book. You could simply refuse to help me once I return. No, I think you should remove Father's spirit from me now before I fix your problems. I sat back in the comfortable chair, enjoying his brief but visible discomfort. He tugged at the bottom of his jacket and looked at me askance. We will put it down in writing, of course, Louisa, and I always honor my contracts. That doesn't satisfy me. I dug my finger into the tablecloth, holding his gaze. If I return from the tomb of ancients and you